7 octillion. That is how many atoms are sitting inside your body at this very moment. A 7 and then 27 zeros trailing off behind it. More than all the grains of sand on every beach in the world. More than the stars you could ever count. And packed into all of that machinery woven through your muscles and your fat and the quiet electrical hum of your brain, there is somewhere between 126 and 320 megajoules of stored chemical energy. Enough to run you for weeks. Enough, if you could release it all at once, to do a startling amount of work. And here is the thing everybody knows. When you die, that is finished. It is over. The energy that was you goes out like a candle in the wind. The electrical signals in your brain, the careful chemical potential locked inside every one of your cells, the warmth of you, the motion of you, all of it stops the moment your biology stops, and it scatters into nothing. Into background noise, into the general murmur of a universe that has already forgotten your name. That is what the physics says. That is what any sensible person believes. The lights go off and there is nothing left to account for. I want you to sit with that idea for a while because it feels true. It feels like the most obvious thing in the world. You have watched a fire burn down to cold gray ash. You have felt a cup of coffee go tepid and then cold on the table while you were busy with something else. You have some deep animal sense that things run down, that they spend themselves, that whatever was burning eventually stops burning and is gone. And so when you imagine your own last moment, you imagine the same thing. A running down, a spending, a gone. That idea is completely wrong, and I can prove it to you. Not with a sermon, not with wishful thinking, not with some comforting story dressed up in the language of science, because I have no patience for that sort of thing, and neither should you. I am going to prove it to you with the single most reliable law we have ever found in all of physics. A law that has never, not once in the entire history of careful measurement, been caught breaking. I am going to prove it to you the slow way, the honest way, by building it up piece by piece until the conclusion is standing there in front of you and you cannot argue with it. And I promise you, by the time we are done, you are going to understand something strange and rather beautiful about what actually happens to your energy after you die. Not what you hope happens, what actually happens, according to the equations. But we are going to do this properly. And doing it properly means I am not allowed to just tell you the answer and have you take my word for it. I want you to feel the wrong idea first. I want you to feel how solid it is, how reasonable, how it fits everything you have ever seen. Because the wrong idea is not stupid. The people who believe it are not stupid. They have simply not looked closely enough at one particular thing, and once we look at that one thing closely, together, the whole picture is going to turn inside out. So let us start with the picture as everybody paints it. Picture a quiet room. It does not matter where, somewhere ordinary. And in that room, a person has just died. The room is very still. And if you had the right instruments, you could watch what happens next, and at first it would look exactly like the candle going out. The body is warm, 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, more or less, that stubborn heat your body fought to hold on to every second of your life. And now, with the fight over, that heat begins to leak away, slowly, into the air, into the sheets, into the floor. The body cools toward the temperature of the room hour by hour, and if you held your hand near it, you would feel the warmth passing into your skin. The last of it going out into the world and spreading thin. Inside, the ordinary chemistry that kept everything running in exquisite order has stopped being managed. There is nobody minding the store anymore. The pumps that kept certain things separated from other things stop pumping. Membranes that held their little boundaries begin to give way. And the bacteria, which were always there, always waiting, always kept politely in check by a living body, discover that the guards have gone home. They begin to eat, and decomposition, that word we do not like to say, is simply chemistry proceeding without supervision. It is bonds breaking. It is complicated molecules falling apart into simpler ones. It is the elaborate, improbable, gorgeously organized structure of a living thing sliding downhill toward disorder. Now, there was a physicist named Erwin Schrödinger, a brilliant man, one of the founders of quantum mechanics, and during the Second World War he gave a set of lectures in Dublin, at the Institute for Advanced Studies there, and he turned them into a small and wonderful book called What is Life? And in that book he asked a question that most people never think to ask. Why does it take so much effort to be alive? Why do you have to eat every single day, over and over, forever, just to stay the same? You are not doing any obvious work. You are sitting in a chair. Why can you not simply be, the way a rock simply is? And his answer was this: a living thing is an island of order in a universe that is relentlessly sliding toward disorder. To stay ordered, to stay this improbable arrangement of atoms that can think and move and worry about its taxes, you have to constantly pay for it. You pay by taking in order from your surroundings and giving back disorder. Schrödinger said the living organism survives by, in his words, sucking orderliness from the environment. Every meal you eat is not really about the energy, not only about the energy, it is about the order. You are borrowing structure from the world to keep your own structure from falling apart. And so, Schrödinger said, when that exchange stops, when the organism can no longer suck orderliness from the world, it settles down into what he called thermodynamic equilibrium. And then, in his marvelous flat way, he wrote that reaching thermodynamic equilibrium is, quote, another way of saying it dies. Equilibrium. Everything the same temperature. Everything evened out. No more islands. No more borrowing. The books are balanced and closed. A modern physicist, Sean Carroll, put the same thought in a way I find hard to improve on. He said, physics keeps the ingredients, but it does not preserve the recipe. Think about what that means. The ingredients, the atoms, the stuff, all of that stays. But the recipe, the particular arrangement, the instructions that said put this here and that there and make it dance in exactly this way, that recipe is gone. And when the recipe is gone, so are you. The cake is unbaked back into flour and eggs and sugar, and no amount of flour and eggs and sugar sitting in a bowl is a cake. Do you feel how strong that is? Do you feel how completely it seems to settle the matter? The heat leaks out. The bonds break. The order collapses. The recipe is lost. Equilibrium arrives, and equilibrium is just the technical name for the end. Every step of that is real physics, and I have not lied to you about any of it. This is what happens. The cooling is real. The decomposition is real. The loss of order is as real and as certain as anything we know. And that is exactly why the wrong idea is so seductive. It is not built out of superstition, it is built out of true facts, arranged so as to point at a false conclusion. Because look at what your mind quietly did while I was talking. Your mind heard heat leaks away, and it thought heat is lost. Your mind heard the order collapses, and it thought the energy is destroyed. Your mind heard the recipe is gone, and it thought therefore everything is gone. And that little quiet leap, that slide from the pattern ended to the energy ended, that is the mistake. That is the whole mistake, right there. It is one word standing in for another, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Because here is the question nobody in that quiet room thought to ask. When the heat leaves the body, where does it go? Not vaguely, not poetically, exactly. When the chemical bonds break, where does the energy that was holding them go? When the candle goes out, the flame is gone, yes, but is the energy of the flame gone, or has it merely left the neighborhood? We have a law about this, the most tested law in all of science. A law with no known exceptions, not one, in the whole history of physics. And that law is going to force us, whether we like it or not, whether it comforts us or terrifies us, to answer a question that the ordinary story of death never even bothers to raise. Follow the energy. Not where it seems to go, where it actually goes. Every joule of it. And to do that, I have to take you back to a lecture hall at Caltech in the autumn of 1961, where I once tried to explain to a room full of restless young people what this thing we call energy really is. Or rather, what it isn't. Because the first surprising truth on this road is that nobody, not me, not anyone, actually knows what energy is at all. Think about what a strange thing that is to admit. Here I am, a man who won a prize for calculating how light and matter talk to each other, standing in front of a blackboard covered in the stuff, and I have to tell you plainly, in physics today, we have no knowledge of what energy is. Those were close to my exact words in that lecture, and I meant them without any wink or trick. It is not a modest way of saying we mostly know but haven't tidied up the corners. It is the real state of affairs. We do not have a picture of energy as a fluid or a substance or a little glowing stuff that pours from one place to another. We have no jar we can point to and say, there, that is a pint of energy. Look at it. What we have instead is something much stranger and I think much more beautiful. We have a number. We have a rule for computing that number. And we have discovered, to our endless astonishment, that no matter what the world does, that number stays the same. Let me say it the careful way, the way I put it in the lecture. There is a certain quantity, which we call energy, that does not change in the manifold changes which nature undergoes. That is the whole law. Read it again slowly in your mind. It does not say what the quantity is made of. It does not say where it lives. It says only that it does not change. Nature can do 1,000 violent things. A star can burst. A child can throw a ball. A body in a quiet room can grow cold. And through every one of those changes, if you are patient enough and clever enough to add up all the pieces, the total comes out the same before and after. That is not obvious. That is not something you would guess by looking at the world. The world looks like a place where things appear and vanish all the time. The whole discovery, the whole hard-won miracle of it, is that underneath all that appearing and vanishing there is a number that refuses to move. Now I want to be honest with you about how hard this idea was to get right, because I think the difficulty is part of the wonder. Years after those lectures, I stood up in front of a room of science teachers and I told them the plain truth. Energy is a very subtle concept. It is very, very difficult to get right. And I was not being falsely humble for a crowd. I was warning them, because I had watched so many people, smart people, honest people, fool themselves about energy. They think they have it, and then some new corner of nature opens up, some new form nobody counted, and the books do not balance, and for a terrible moment it looks as though the great law has failed. And then someone finds the missing form. Someone realizes there was energy hiding in the heat, or hiding in the motion of molecules too small to see, or hiding, most shockingly of all, in the very mass of things. And the books balance again. Every single time so far in the entire history of the subject, the books have balanced again. So how do you hold on to a thing you cannot see, a thing you cannot even define, a thing that keeps slipping into new disguises? You hold on to it by counting. That is the only tool we have, and it turns out to be enough. And to show you how counting can be enough, even when the thing you are counting has no face and no substance, I want to tell you about a small boy and his blocks. I made him up for that lecture. This boy, a little terror of a child, the sort who is always into something. Picture him in the morning, in a room with the light just coming in, and he has a set of blocks. Wooden blocks, heavy, hard, and let us pretend, just for the story, that they are perfectly indestructible. You cannot break them. You cannot cut them. You cannot burn them, or dissolve them, or wear them down. There are 28 of them, not 27, not 29. His mother, who is a careful woman, counted them once, and there were 28, and she remembers. Now here is the game. Every evening she counts again. And every evening, no matter what sort of day that wild little boy has had, she finds 28. At first, this is no mystery at all. The blocks are indestructible after all. Of course, there are 28. But children are inventive, and the world is complicated, and soon the counting stops being so simple. One day she counts and finds only 25. 3 are missing. Has the law failed? Has a block ceased to exist? She does not panic. She is a scientist at heart. She looks around the room, and there, under the rug, is a suspicious little bump. She does not need to lift the rug. She has a rule. She knows the weight of one block, and she can press down and feel the lump, or weigh the rug, and the extra weight tells her, without her ever seeing the blocks themselves, that there are 3 under there. 25 in plain view, 3 hidden under the rug, and the total is 28 again. The law holds. She only had to look in a new place. The next day it is worse. She counts, and there are only 22 in sight, and the rug is flat, nothing under it. But the window is open, and outside there is a toy box, and the lid is shut, and she is not allowed to open it, let us say, because of the rules of our little game. No matter. She has weighed the toy box before, empty, and she knows its weight. She weighs it now. It is heavier, and when she divides the extra weight by the weight of 1 block, she gets a whole number, and that number is exactly enough to bring the total back to 28. She never saw the blocks in the box. She inferred them purely by the bookkeeping. And then it gets stranger still. The boy, being a boy, throws some of his blocks into the bathtub, and the water is dirty and gray, and she cannot see the bottom, cannot count the blocks lying there. So what does she do? She measures the height of the water. She knows how much the water rises when 1 block goes in. She measures the rise, she does the arithmetic, and the hidden blocks in the murky water announce themselves through the level of the water alone. Do you see what is happening in this little house? The mother has never once caught all 28 blocks in her hand at the same time. Some are always hidden, some are under the rug, some are in the box, some are drowned in the gray water, and yet she is more certain of the number 28 than she is of almost anything, because she has learned to count what she cannot see, by its effects. The lump under the rug, the weight of the box, the rise of the water. Each hiding place needs its own little formula, its own way of translating an effect back into account. But when she adds up the blocks she can see, plus the ones the rug betrays, plus the ones the box confesses to, plus the ones the water gives away, the sum is always, always 28. And now I am going to tell you the thing that turns this whole cozy story into a piece of the deepest physics there is. In the case of energy, there are no blocks. Let that land gently. In the real law, the law of the conservation of energy, there is no little wooden cube, no hard, indestructible thing you could ever hold, not even in principle. There is nothing under the rug to see if only the rug were lifted. There is only the counting, only the formulas, only the several ways of computing a number from the state of the world. Gravitational energy has its formula. The energy of motion has another. Heat has its own, and stored elastic tension its own, and the energy locked in electric charge, and the energy asleep in chemical bonds, and the energy carried away as light, and the terrible energy sleeping in the nucleus, and, most astonishing of all, the energy that simply is the mass of a thing sitting still. 9 ways of counting in that lecture. 9 hiding places. And the whole content of the law, the entire miracle, is that when you compute each one and add them all together, the total does not change. So keep the boy and his mother in your mind as we go on, because that quiet house is going to be our guide through everything that follows. When a body cools in a still room and the warmth seems simply to fade away into nothing, do not believe the fading. Be the mother. Ask where the blocks went. Measure the temperature of the air. Feel the floor warming just barely, under the weight of what left the body. The energy did not vanish. It moved to a hiding place, and it left its fingerprints on everything it touched, and if we are careful, if we are honest counters, we can follow every last jewel of it out of that room. There is no exception known to this law. Not one in the whole history of physics. And a law with no exceptions is not a suggestion about the world. It is a promise. It promises that the number that was you does not simply drop out of the ledger of the universe on the day the counting seems to stop. Let me stay in that room a little longer, because there is something almost tender about a promise like that, and I want you to feel the weight of it before we start to open the drawers and look for where the warmth went. A promise with no exceptions is a strange thing to hold in your hand. It does not care whether you are a physicist or a mother or a child stacking blocks on the kitchen floor. It applies to the burning of a candle and the turning of a galaxy and the cooling of a body in a quiet house, all with the same indifferent thoroughness. So let us be thorough too. Let us open the first drawer. The first drawer is the one nobody thinks to open. because it looks empty. It is the drawer marked with the atoms themselves. You see, when we say the pattern ended, when we say the dance stopped, we have quietly smuggled in an assumption, and I want to drag that assumption out into the light and look at it. We assume that the dancers went home. But they did not go home. There is no home for them to go to. The atoms that made the boy's grandmother, or made you, or made me, are not the sort of thing that ends when a life ends. They were here long before the life gathered them up, and they will be here long after the life sets them down. Think about what an atom actually is, in the plainest way I can put it. It is a little clenched knot of matter, unimaginably small, moving all the time, never resting, never tired. There are something like 7 octillion of them in a grown human body. I cannot make that number mean anything to you by saying it, and neither can anybody, so let me not pretend. 7 followed by 27 zeros. If you tried to count them, 1 each second, you would not finish before the sun burned out. And every single one of those little knots is for all ordinary purposes indestructible. You cannot break one by dying. You cannot break one by burning, or rotting, or weeping over it. Under the gentle conditions of a body and a room, and the ordinary chemistry of the world, atoms are simply not the sort of thing that goes away. I once said, and I meant it as plainly as I have ever meant anything, that if all of our science were to be wiped out in some catastrophe, and I were allowed to pass just one sentence to whoever came after, I would tell them this, that all things are made of atoms, little particles that move about in perpetual motion. Perpetual. That word is doing quiet, patient work in that sentence, and I want you to hear it now with new ears. Perpetual motion. Not motion that pauses at the moment of a death and resumes politely afterward. Motion that never once stopped. The atoms in the cooling body are moving at that very moment, jostling, drifting, wandering off into the air and the sheets and the wood of the floor. They did not attend the funeral. They were already leaving before anyone in the room knew what leaving was. So here is the first crack in the comfortable wall we built, and I want to tap it gently and let you hear how hollow the wall really is. We told ourselves a story in which death is an ending, a closing of the account, a final total drawn beneath a column of figures. But the atoms never got the message. To them, nothing ended. A river does not end because you scoop a single cupful out of it and pour that cupful back a little further downstream. The water simply keeps going. And a human body, seen at the scale of its atoms, is far more like a place the river passes through than like a jar the river is kept in. Matter is flowing through you, right now as you lie there listening. It came in through your breakfast and your breath, and it will leave through 100 quiet doors, and this was true on the first day of your life, and it will be true on the last. And death does not switch the river off. It only stops the particular bend the river had been making. Now let me open the second drawer, because the first one already unsettles the story, but the second one takes it apart entirely. The second drawer holds a question so simple that grown people almost never ask it, the way they almost never ask why the sky is up. The question is this: what, exactly, is you? Not who. What material, what stuff, what parcel of the world do you point to when you say the word? You will be tempted to point at the atoms. But we have just watched the atoms come and go like guests at a railway station, and here is the thing that makes it strange. This coming and going is not something that begins at death. It has been happening the whole time you are alive. I said it once about my own brain, and I say it now about yours. The atoms come into the brain, they dance their dance, and then they go out again, and new atoms come in to take their places, always new atoms, but always doing the very same dance, remembering somehow what the dance was yesterday. The matter you are made of this year is very largely not the matter you were made of some years ago. You have changed your substance many times over without ever noticing, without ever losing yourself in the exchange. You did not become a different person when the atoms of last spring's dinners washed out of you, and the atoms of this spring's dinners washed in. You went on being you. Sit with that a moment, because it is the whole hinge of the thing. If you had truly been the atoms, then you would have died many times already, quietly, in your sleep, each time your body swapped out its material. But you did not. which means the thing you call yourself, the thing you have been defending against the idea of death this entire time, was never the atoms in the first place. It was the arrangement of them. The pattern. The dance. I have said it before and I will keep saying it because I do not know a truer way to put it. The thing which I call my individuality is only a pattern, or a dance. The stuff is on loan. The stuff was always on loan. You are not the clay. You are the shape a certain patch of the world is holding for a while. And now, having said that, do you begin to see how peculiar our comfortable story has become? We set out to grieve the loss of a thing at death. But when we go looking for the thing, we cannot find any single lump of matter that qualifies. The atoms were never uniquely yours, and they do not end. And the pattern, the dance, was never made of any one fixed set of them. So the question of what happens to your energy after you die is quietly turning into a stranger and better question, which is what were you, exactly that any of this should happen to? Let me push one drawer further, and this one is the deepest, and I will open it slowly. Go down below the atoms, down to the little pieces the atoms themselves are built from, the electrons and the rest, into the country where I spent most of my working life. Down there, ownership becomes a kind of joke. One electron is not merely similar to another electron. It is identical to it, in a way that has no parallel in ordinary life. Two grains of sand can be told apart if you look closely enough. Two electrons cannot, not even in principle, not by any experiment anyone has ever devised or, so far as we can tell, ever could devise. There is no scratch on one, no serial number, no little flag that says this one belonged to the grandmother and that one belonged to the sea. When we work out the deep rules of nature, we find we must treat them as truly interchangeable, and everything we measure agrees. So when you say my atoms, my particles, my energy, the words are sweet, but they are not quite true. The electrons doing the electrical business in a living nerve are the same kind of thing exactly as the electrons in a candle flame and a thundercloud and a distant star. They were passing through the arrangement we called you. They were never stamped with your name. And at the level where I did my counting, the level of the fields that fill all of space, the particles are not even really little objects that could be owned. They are more like the ripples on a pond are to the pond. A ripple is not a thing you can pick up and carry away and keep in a box. It is something the water is briefly doing. The particles are something the fields are briefly doing. And you, dear listener, whatever else you turn out to be, are something a great crowd of those ripples was briefly doing together, in a shape that could ask what it was. So already, before we have even begun to follow the heat out of the room, 3 cracks run up the wall of the comfortable idea. The atoms do not end. The pattern was never the atoms, and the atoms were never truly yours to begin with. Hold those 3 cracks lightly, the way you would hold 3 notes of a chord, and let them keep sounding under everything that comes next. Because now, at last, we can go back into that quiet room and start actually following the warmth. We can open the drawer marked heat, and the drawer marked light, and the drawer marked the slow chemistry of the returning earth, and we can do the thing the mother asked us to do at the very beginning. We can count every last jewel of it, and find, to our astonishment, that not one of them is missing. Come and stand with me by the bed then, and put the back of your hand near the still chest, the way a nurse does. You feel warmth. Not much, and fading, but warmth. That warmth is the first joel we are going to chase, and it is the easiest one to follow, because it is doing the most ordinary thing in the world. A living person sits at about 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. The room around, let us say, sits at about 70. There is a difference, and nature simply cannot leave a difference alone. Heat is nothing more than the jiggling of atoms, the small restless trembling that never stops, and where the atoms tremble hard next to atoms that tremble gently, the hard tremble spreads. It is like a rowdy table at a quiet dinner. The noise does not stay at the one table. It leaks into the whole room until everybody is talking at the same low murmur. The body was the rowdy table, the room is the rest of the dinner. And the murmur spreads until you could not tell, by temperature alone, where the guest had been sitting. So the warmth leaves, and it leaves by 3 roads at once, and I want to walk each of them slowly, because each is one of the drawers we promised to open. The first road is touch. The skin lies against the sheet against the mattress against the frame against the floor, and along that whole chain the jiggle passes from atom to neighboring atom, hand over hand, like a bucket line at a fire. No atom travels far, each just nudges the next and settles back. But the trembling itself travels, sheet into mattress, into floorboard, into the beams of the house, and if you had a thermometer fine enough, you would watch the sheet grow a hair warmer while the body grows a hair cooler, and the two numbers would creep toward each other with a patience that nothing in the universe can hurry. The second road is the air. The skin warms the thin layer of air lying against it, and warm air is loose air, air whose atoms have spread apart and grown light, and light things rise. So a slow, invisible plume lifts off the body the way a plume lifts off a cup of tea, and cooler air slides in underneath to take its place, and is warmed in its turn, and rises in its turn. There is a gentle circulation in that quiet room, a soft overturning you cannot see, carrying warmth up to the ceiling and out through every crack and keyhole into the corridor, into the street, into the sky. The jewels do not vanish when they leave through the window. They are simply spread now across a far larger crowd of atoms, so thin, so diluted, that no instrument you own could ever gather them back. But thin is not gone. Spread is not destroyed. Every one of them is still on the books. And the third road, the quietest and the strangest, is light. You do not think of a body as glowing, because your eyes are not built to see the color it glows in. But everything warm glows. The iron in a fire glows red because it is very hot. Your hand and mine and the body on the bed all glow too, only down in the deep infrared, a color below red, a color the eye cannot reach. It pours off the skin as invisible radiant light, streaming out in straight lines at the full speed of light, 186,000 miles every second, crossing the room before the thought is finished, soaking into the walls, the ceiling, the cold face of the window, and where the window is glass, some of it slips right through and rides out into the night and does not stop. That is radiant energy, one of the 9 faces we counted earlier, and here it is, leaving a person exactly as the formula said it must, every wavelength accounted for, every joule signed and dated as it goes. Notice what has happened. We opened the drawer marked heat, and we opened the drawer marked light, and we did not find a mystery inside either one. We found bookkeeping, dull, faithful, unbreakable bookkeeping. The warmth of a life, the whole gentle furnace of it, does not wink out of existence at the last breath. It walks out along 3 roads, by touch and by air and by invisible light, into the sheet and the floor and the sky, and if you added up every trembling atom it warmed on the way and every ray it sent through the glass, the sum would come to precisely what the body held. Not a fraction more. Not a fraction less. Dennis still has his 28 blocks. We have merely watched a few of them slide under the rug of the room, and we know, because the counting rule has never once failed, exactly what is under there. But heat and light are only the surface of the ledger, the loose change lying on top. The great vault of energy in a body was never the warmth at all. It was locked away far below, in the bonds between atoms, in the chemistry, and to open that vault we have to leave the tidy language of thermometers and walk into something messier and, I think, more beautiful. Because the body is not going to simply cool and sit there like a stone. The room is not empty. It is crowded invisibly with life that has been waiting, politely, all along. Consider what a living body spends every waking hour doing. It holds itself together against a whole world that would like to take it apart. Every cell is a little factory running uphill, pumping, mending, sorting, spending energy without pause just to stay the orderly thing it is. Schrödinger, in Dublin, in the middle of a terrible war, put his finger on exactly this. A living creature, he said, feeds on orderliness. It reaches out into its surroundings and pulls in order and pushes out disorder. And by that ceaseless trade, it keeps itself from crumbling. Stop the trade, and the crumbling begins at once. That is not poetry. That is the second great law of nature, the one about disorder always winning in the long run, and life is the temporary, gorgeous, expensive act of holding that law at arm's length. So when the pumping stops, the arm relaxes, and the law that was always waiting simply steps forward. Nothing attacks. Nothing is punished. The uphill work merely ceases, and everything that was being held up begins gently to roll back down. And here is where the crowd in the room comes in. In the gut, on the skin, in every fold of tissue, live enormous populations of bacteria that all along were kept in their place by a living body's defenses. Those defenses run on energy too, and when the energy stops flowing, the fences come down. The bacteria find themselves in the middle of the richest larder they will ever know. Fats and sugars and the long folded proteins that were muscle and membrane, all of it packed with energy in its chemical bonds, all of it now unguarded. And that is the vault, swinging open. Think of what fat alone contains. Roughly 37,000 joules in a single gram, which is why an animal stores its winter and its long journeys as fat and not as anything else. Nothing else in the body packs energy so tightly. Add up the fat and the sugars and the proteins, and the estimates run from about 126 million joules on the lean and careful end, up to perhaps 320 million joules on the generous end. Those are big numbers and honestly rough ones, and I would not trust them to the last digit for a moment. But the size of them tells the story. That is the energy of days of hard living, still sitting there, still folded into the bonds at the moment the person is gone. The bacteria do to those bonds exactly what your own body did to its dinner. They break them and rearrange them, and in the breaking and rearranging they capture energy to run their own small lives, to grow, to multiply, to warm their crowded neighborhood a little. Which is why, strange as it sounds, a body deep in this returning can grow warm again from the inside. Warmed now not by a beating heart, but by the busy metabolism of the multitudes taking it apart. The chemical energy that was yours becomes theirs, and then, as they die and are eaten in their turn, becomes the next comer's. And every step of that handing along obeys the same iron rule we started with. Bonds break, bonds form, and when you tally the energy released against the energy taken up, the columns balance to the last joule. There is no leak in the world. There has never been found one leak. Let me stay with that thought a moment longer, because it deserves it. There is no leak in the world. Say it slowly, and it sounds like a small thing, a piece of bookkeeping, the kind of remark an accountant makes about a ledger. But turn it over in your hands and it becomes one of the most astonishing facts anyone has ever noticed about the place we live in. Everything you have ever done, every step you took, every warm breath you let out on a cold morning, every idea that made your heart beat faster, every one of those was energy moving from one form into another. And not a scrap of it was ever lost. It was only ever passed along. The universe is not a spendthrift. It is not even generous exactly. It is scrupulous. It keeps perfect books, down to the last decimal that we could ever hope to measure, and it has never once, in all the checking anyone has done, been caught short a single coin. Now I want you to feel the strangeness of applying that rule to the quietest room in the world, the room where someone has just died. Because the rule does not knock politely and wait outside the door. It does not make an exception for grief. The same law that governs a stove and a waterfall on a falling stone governs that room, and it governs it just as exactly. The warmth leaving that still body, drifting into the sheets and the air and the walls, is not vanishing. It is being counted, joule by joule, by a universe that cannot do otherwise. The person is gone. The energy is not gone. And the gap between those two sentences is the whole subject of this talk, the whole ache of it, and I think the whole quiet comfort of it too. Here is something that took me a long time to really sit with. When we say the body cools, we make it sound like a fading, like a candle guttering out. But cooling is not disappearing. Cooling is spreading. The heat that was concentrated in one warm shape, held there by the ceaseless work of a living metabolism, simply stops being held in one place and begins to even itself out across everything nearby. Picture a drop of ink let fall into a still glass of water. At first it is a dark knot, dense and defined, and you could point to it and say, "There, that is the ink." And then it unwinds. It reaches out in slow curling threads, thinner and paler, until the whole glass is a faint uniform gray and you cannot point anywhere and say the ink is here rather than there. The ink did not leave. Not one particle of it climbed out of the glass. It is all still present, every bit of it. Only now it is everywhere instead of somewhere. That is what heat does when a body cools. That is what the second law is always doing. Gently, patiently, to everything. It does not take. It smooths. And I find I cannot call that a cruelty. It is only the same even-handedness that let you be warm in the first place. You spent a whole life running slightly uphill against that smoothing, pulling order in through your food and your breath, keeping your inside sharper and warmer and more particular than your surroundings, the way Schrödinger described it, sucking orderliness out of the world to hold your own shape together. Every living thing is a small stubborn eddy in a river that is always trying to flow flat, and when the eddy stops turning, the river does not punish it. The river simply closes over the spot and goes on, carrying the same water it always carried. Let me put a number back on the table, gently, because I promised you the honesty of the bookkeeping. We said the body holds somewhere between about 126 and 320 megajoules of stored chemical energy, depending on how much fuel a particular person happens to be carrying. I want you to have a feeling for how much that is, not to be impressed, but to be accurate. A megajoule is 1,000,000 joules, and a joule is about the work you do lifting a small apple 1 meter against gravity. So we are talking about the apple lifted, on the order of 100 million to a few 100 million times over. It is the energy of a fair-sized bolt of lightning. It is roughly what you would get from burning a few kilograms of gasoline. It is a real, physical, countable quantity, and it was folded up inside a person the whole time, quietly, in the bonds between atoms, the way tension is folded into a drawn bow. And when the living arrangement lets go, all of that begins its long unfolding into the world by exactly the paths we have been tracing. Some slips out as heat and infrared light in those first still hours. Far more of it stays locked in the bonds a while longer, waiting until the decomposers arrive and begin their patient dismantling, taking their cut of the energy the way every living thing takes its cut and passing the rest along down the line. Not one joule of that 100-odd megajoules gets an exemption. Not one gets to simply cease. Every last unit of it has a forwarding address, and the universe, that scrupulous clerk, delivers all of it. I want to slow down here and be careful, because it would be easy to make this sound tidier and warmer than it honestly is, and I have no use for a comfort you have to lie to keep. The energy continues. That much is as certain as anything in physics. But I am not telling you that the person continues, and I would be a poor guide if I let you drift off thinking I had said so. The heat that leaves the room is not sad about leaving. It carries no memory of the hand it used to warm. The atoms that go wandering off into the soil do not remember which brain they once danced in. When I insist that nothing is destroyed, I am making a statement about joules and atoms, about quantities and counts, and I am being scrupulously careful not to sneak in a promise about the pattern, about the particular arrangement that did the remembering and the loving and the worrying about tomorrow. That is a different question, and it deserves its own honest answer, which we are walking towards slowly and which I will not cheapen by getting there early. Because here is the thing that snags in me and will not come loose. The energy is the easy part. Truly. The conservation of energy is settled science. No known exception, the surest ledger we have ever kept. If all you cared about was the fate of the joules, you could stop worrying tonight, the books balance, good night. But nobody who has ever lost someone lies awake wondering where the joules went. That is not the ache. The ache is about the arrangement, the particular thisness of a particular person, the exact way those atoms were dancing and no other way. And physics has a great deal to say about that too, some of it harder than the energy story and some of it, I have come to think, stranger and even gentler. But we cannot get there by pretending the energy story is the whole story. It is only the ground floor. It is only the part that is airtight. So let me hold us here on the ground floor one more breath and admire how airtight it really is, because we are about to climb. Think of everything that has to be true for that ledger to balance in the quiet room. The heat spreading into the walls has to be counted. The faint infrared glow slipping away into the dark has to be counted. The chemical energy still folded in the bonds, waiting for the bacteria, has to be counted and then recounted as it changes hands 1,000 times among the decomposers, and again as it feeds the roots, and again as the roots feed a leaf, and again as the leaf feeds a caterpillar, and on down a chain with no end that we can see. And through every single one of those handings, across every membrane and every broken bond and every warm afternoon of a summer that hasn't happened yet, the total does not waver. The clerk never blinks. The clerk has never, not once in the entire history of careful looking, been caught with the books out of balance. That is not a small thing to fall asleep on. That is about the largest thing there is. There is a law running underneath the whole world, underneath the stove and the waterfall and the still room, and it does not care whether you are watching, and it does not care whether you approve, and it will keep every last jewel of you accounted for long after the accounting stops mattering to you personally. Some people find that cold. I have never been able to. I find it faithful. I find it, of all the words I could reach for, honest. The universe will not lie to you about where you went. It cannot. It is not built to lose things. And yet there is that gap again. That gap between the Joels and the person, and I have been walking you carefully up to its edge, and now I think it is time we look straight down into it, because the honest answer waiting at the bottom is not the one most people expect, and it begins with a question that sounds almost too simple to bother asking. What exactly was ever yours to lose? Let me answer it slowly, because the slowness is the whole point. You think of your atoms as belonging to you the way your shoes belong to you. You bought them, you wear them, they are yours until you give them away. But that is not how any of it works, and it never was, not for 1 second of your life. Consider a single carbon atom sitting right now in the muscle of your hand. Where was it a year ago? Quite possibly in a stalk of wheat, in a field you have never seen. And before that, dissolved in the air is a whisper of carbon dioxide. And before that, perhaps locked in a lump of coal for 200 million years, and before that, in the body of some creature that swam in a sea that no longer has a name. That atom has had 10,000 addresses. It stayed nowhere. It signed no lease. It is passing through you the way a traveler passes through a train station, and the station does not own the traveler simply because he paused under its roof to check the time. So when I say the atoms of your body leave at death, I am telling you something less dramatic than it sounds. Because the atoms of your body were leaving the entire time you were alive. You are not a thing. You are a place where things happen to be, briefly, in a particular arrangement. The water in you today is not the water that was in you a few weeks ago. The fat you carry is burned and rebuilt, even the hard parts. The bone that feels so permanent, so much like the frame of a house, is quietly torn down and laid back up by little cells that work like a demolition crew and a mason crew sharing the same wall. One taking bricks out while the other puts new bricks in, and somehow the wall stands the whole time. You have been renovated so many times that almost nothing of the original building remains, and yet you would swear on everything, that you are the same person you were as a child. And here is the marvelous thing. You are right. You are the same person. It is just that the sameness was never in the material. This is what I was reaching for years ago when I tried to say it plainly, and I will say it again the way I said it then, because I have never found a better way. The atoms come into my brain, they dance a dance, and then they go out. Always new atoms, but always doing the same dance, remembering what the dance was yesterday. That word remembering is doing an enormous amount of quiet work in that sentence, and I want you to sit with it. The atoms do not remember anything. A carbon atom has no memory, it carries no diary of where it has been. But the pattern remembers. The arrangement passes its shape along to the atoms that arrive, the way a melody hummed from one person to another carries the tune across without carrying a single sound wave across. The singer changes. The song does not. And the thing I have the nerve to call my individuality, the thing you call yourself, your one and only irreplaceable self, is only that. It is a pattern. It is a dance. And I do not say only to make it small, I say only to make it clear. because once you truly see that you are the dance and not the dancers, a great many frightening things quietly stop being frightening. Now let me push on this, because it gets stranger and I think more beautiful the harder you push. I told you that atom in your hand is just passing through, but suppose I tried to prove it was really truly yours. Suppose I marked it somehow, put a little flag on it, and I said, this one, this particular carbon atom, this is genuinely Feynman's atom, accept no substitutes. I could not do it. And not because I lack a small enough pen. I could not do it because nature itself refuses to make the distinction. Down at the bottom of things, where the work I was given a prize for lives, one electron is exactly, perfectly, and without the faintest shadow of difference, the same as every other electron in the universe. They are not like twins, who at least have different fingerprints if you look close. They are identical in a way nothing in ordinary life is identical. Take two electrons, swap them, put one where the other was, and there is no measurement, none, not now, not ever, that could tell you a swap occurred. The universe does not keep separate accounts for them. They are not two things that happen to look alike. In the deepest sense we can speak of, they are the same thing, showing up in two places. Feel what that does to the word yours. If your electrons are indistinguishable from mine and from a star's and from an electron that has been drifting through empty space since before the Earth had a crust, then in what sense were they ever exclusively assigned to you? You cannot lose at death what was never issued to you as private property in the first place. The atoms were on loan. The electrons were not even really countable as individuals. What you had was not a warehouse of positions. What you had was a style, a way of holding the borrowed things in motion, a signature written in water that keeps its shape only as long as the hand keeps writing. And underneath even the atoms, if you go down as far as the physics will let you go, the particles themselves stop being little marbles at all. What is really there, as best as we can tell, is a set of fields, filling all of space everywhere at once, and a particle is just a place where one of those fields is humming. A ripple standing up out of a fabric that was there before the ripple and will be there after. An electron is a note played on a field the way a sound is a note played on the air. When the note ends, the air does not end. The air was never the note. It was only for a while carrying it. So when I ask you what was ever yours to lose, the honest answer, followed all the way down, is that you were never a collection of things at all. You were a way that the deepest fabric of the world was briefly moving. And a way of moving cannot be buried, because it was never a thing you could hold in your hand to begin with. I want to be careful here, because this is exactly the place where a person can start talking nonsense and dress it up in physics words to make it sound respectable. I am not telling you that some ghostly you floats off intact. I am not smuggling a soul in through the back door and calling it a field. Let me be as plain as I know how. The particular dance that was you, the exact arrangement, the memories, the voice, the way you laughed at a certain kind of joke, that arrangement does stop. The music ends. I am not going to soften that for you at 2 in the morning, because you would know I was lying, and I would rather be honest and let you sleep than comforting and leave you feeling swindled. What I am telling you is something else, something quieter and to my mind more astonishing. The music ends, but nothing that played it is destroyed. Not one particle. Not one jewel. The orchestra sets down its instruments and walks off into the rest of the world, every player intact, and each of them will play in 1,000 songs after yours, songs you will never hear, and they will carry, in the plain fact of their motion, the same conservation law that carried you. So we have pried two ideas apart that most people keep glued together their whole lives without ever noticing the glue. One idea is the stuff. The other idea is the shape of the stuff. When someone dies, the ordinary feeling, the feeling at the graveside, is that everything is gone. But that feeling has smuggled the two ideas into a single word, gone, and hidden the seam. Pull the seam back open, and you find that only one of the two is gone. The shape is gone. The stuff is entirely, meticulously, unfailingly still here. Sean Carroll put it about as cleanly as anyone has. Physics keeps the ingredients. It does not preserve the recipe. Read that once, and it sounds like a small, clever remark. Read it again slowly, and it is nearly the whole story of death written in 9 words. The flour is still flour. The eggs are still eggs. What is gone is the particular loaf, the specific rising and browning that happened once in one oven and will never happen in precisely that way again. That is a real loss. I will not pretend a loaf is nothing. But the loss is a loss of arrangement, not a loss of substance, and the arrangement was always the most fragile and most temporary thing about you, and also, and here is the part I keep circling back to, the arrangement was always the only part that was truly you. Which leaves us with a strange inheritance to sort through. If the stuff continues and only the pattern stops, then the whole weight of the question shifts. It is no longer, where did my energy go? Because we can answer that one now, we can practically follow it out the door and down the hall. The harder and better question, the one worth staying awake a few more minutes for, is what a pattern even is, that it can matter so enormously while it lasts and yet leave no gap in the account when it ends. And to get at that, I have to take you back to a man giving lectures in a cold city during a war, a physicist who set aside his own field for a season to ask what of all things life itself might be. When you insist on looking at it as nothing but atoms obeying the ordinary laws. His name was Erwin Schrödinger, and by the time he stood up to give these talks, he had already helped write the rule book of the very small. But the war had scattered him, and he had landed in Dublin at an institute for advanced study, and there, in the year 1944, he published a slim little book with a question for a title. He called it, simply, What is Life? And the thing I love about it, the thing that makes it brave, is that he did not answer with poetry or with mystery. He answered with thermodynamics. He looked at a living thing, a cell, a leaf, a man, and he asked the most deflating possible question. If you are nothing but atoms, and atoms obey the ordinary laws, then how on earth do you keep from falling apart? Because that is the puzzle, you see. Everything else falls apart. Leave a sandcastle by the water and the tide flattens it. Leave a hot cup of tea on the table and it cools to match the room every time, and never once does the room warm the tea back up on its own. Leave an ice sculpture in the sun and you get a puddle, and the puddle never gathers itself back into a swan. There is a direction to things, a downhill slope that everything rolls along, from the arranged toward the jumbled, from the sharp toward the smeared, from order toward disorder. Physicists gave that slope a name. They call the disorder entropy, and the rule is that in the world as a whole, entropy only ever goes up. It is the surest bet in all of science. You will lose every other wager before you lose that one. So here comes the trouble. A living body is about the most orderly thing you will ever meet. Think of the arrangement it takes to be alive. Every protein folded into exactly the right shape. Every cell holding its walls against the flood. A heart that keeps its rhythm for 70 years. A brain wired into a pattern so fine that it can sit on a beach and wonder about itself. That is order piled upon order, piled upon order. And it sits there day after day, refusing to slide down the hill that everything else slides down. By all the rules I have just given you, it should not last an afternoon. It should smear out like the tea, slump like the sandcastle, and rejoin the general jumble of the world. And yet there you are, reading nothing, listening in the dark, still gloriously arranged. Schrödinger's answer was quiet and it was clever, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. He said, the living thing does not break the rule. It cannot. Nobody breaks that rule. What the living thing does is cheat, in a perfectly legal way. It does not lower its own entropy by magic. It pays for its order by pushing disorder out into the world around it. It reaches out into its surroundings and it pulls in order and it dumps out disorder, and it does this every second of every day that it is alive. He had a lovely phrase for it. He said the organism feeds upon negative entropy. It drinks orderliness from its environment. That is what eating really is, when you strip the pleasure away and look at the physics. That is what breathing is. You take in things that are structured, sugar molecules packed tight with arrangement, oxygen ready to burn, and you take the order out of them for your own use, and you breathe and sweat and radiate the leftover mess back into the room as heat and as simpler, more scattered stuff. I want you to feel how strange and how ordinary that is at the same time. A candle flame holds its shape. It flickers, it dances, it looks almost alive, and it holds that little teardrop form for as long as you let it. But the flame is not keeping any order for itself. The flame is a place where order is being destroyed, where the tight-packed energy of the wax is being flung out into the room as light and heat as fast as it can go. You are not like the flame. You are the opposite of the flame. You are a place where order is being gathered in and held at a price, a running tab paid to the surroundings, a little more disorder shoved out into the universe with every heartbeat so that the pattern inside can stay sharp one more day. Life is not a substance. Life is a transaction. It is a standing arrangement with the second law, a loan taken out against the entropy of the whole world, and the interest comes due continuously, and you pay it, without thinking, without stopping, from your first breath to your last. And now, you see, we are standing right at the edge of the thing we came here to understand. Because if life is that transaction, that constant paying and pulling, that endless drinking of order from the outside, then what is death? Death is not some new force that arrives from somewhere else and strikes you down. Death is the transaction stopping. It is the moment the pulling in ceases. The heart quits its pumping, the lungs quit their drawing, the 1,000 tiny pumps in every cell that spent their whole existence holding the line against the flood, they run out of the fuel that ran them, and they let go. And the instant they let go, nothing is holding the order in place anymore. Nothing is paying the interest. And so the loan is called in, all at once, the way a loan always is in the end. The body, which spent a lifetime refusing to slide down the hill, finally slides. Scholdinger put it about as plainly as it can be put. He said that when this exchange stops, the organism reaches thermodynamic equilibrium. And then he added the line that I think is the truest and the gentlest definition of dying that any physicist has ever written. He said, that is another way of saying it dies. Equilibrium. It is a peaceful word, really, once you sit with it. All it means is that the inside has finally come to match the outside. The warmth that was held apart at 98.5 degrees Fahrenheit, held there so carefully against the cool of the room, is now allowed to even out until the body is the temperature of the air and the air is very slightly warmer for it. The gradients smooth, the differences relax. Everything that was held taut goes slack. That is all equilibrium is. It is the body at long last being allowed to stop swimming against the current and to drift where the whole river was always going to carry it. But notice, and I want you to notice this very carefully because it is the whole hinge of the thing, notice that not one word of what I just described involves anything being destroyed. The order is lost. The order goes. The pattern that held the warmth apart from the cold dissolves, and once it dissolves, the warmth flows out and joins the room. But the warmth itself is not lost. It is exactly conserved. It goes into the air, into the sheets, into the floor, and if you had a fine enough instrument, you could add up every last bit of it and find that not a single jewel went missing. What died was the arrangement that kept the jewels from spreading. The jewels were never in any danger at all. They cannot be. We spent the whole first part of our evening proving that they cannot be. This is the same truth Schrödinger's answer gives us that the counting of energy gave us, only now it comes dressed in the language of order instead of the language of amount. The first law told us the quantity is safe. Nothing is created, nothing destroyed, the total is forever. And now the second law, the entropy law, tells us what actually changes hands. It is not the quantity, it is the arrangement. It is the difference between having your energy stacked up neatly, dammed and held and ready, and having it spread thin and even across everything nearby. Life is the stacking. Death is the spreading. And the second law says the spreading was always going to win for every dam that was ever built, because entropy is patient, and entropy is undefeated, and entropy has all the time in the world. There is something almost tender in that if you let there be. A living body is a small argument the universe is having with itself. On the one side, the great smooth drift towards sameness, the flattening, the cooling, the mixing that pulls at everything. On the other, this improbable little knot of order that says, not yet, not yet, and holds its shape and drinks its orderliness and pays its tab and keeps on being a particular someone for a while. And the beautiful thing, the thing I do not think you should be sad about, is that the knot never had to win the argument to have been worth making. It only had to last long enough to notice it was happening, to stand on a shore, to wonder at wondering. The drift will have its way in the end. It always does. But it does not get to say the knot was pointless, and it cannot, take back a single day the knot was tied. So we have two great laws now, and they are shaking hands over the same quiet room. The one guards the amount and swears nothing can go missing. The other watches the arrangement and explains without cruelty why the arrangement could not stay. Between the two of them there is no gap left for anything to fall through, no place for a thing to simply vanish. And yet a person did just stop. Both laws are satisfied, and a whole world of experience has ended all the same. How can the books balance perfectly and a life still be over? To answer that, we have to stop talking about heat and order for a while and go and find out what a pattern is really made of. Not what it is made of in stuff, we know that. It is made of atoms like everything else. I mean, what is it made of that is not stuff at all. Think about a wave that rolls across the water toward the beach. You watch it come in, a long smooth ridge lifting and traveling, and you say, there it goes, there is the wave, moving. But nothing is moving across the water the way you think. The water itself is not traveling toward you. Each little parcel of water lifts up and sets back down, up and down, more or less in place, like a crowd in a stadium standing and sitting so that a ripple of raised arms runs all the way around the ring. No single person runs around the stadium. The pattern runs around the stadium. The people only stand and sit. And yet the wave is real. You can measure how fast it goes. You can watch it break. It carries energy across the whole harbor and dumps that energy onto the sand. A thing that is not stuff, riding on stuff that barely moves, and it is as real as anything you will ever touch. So there is our first honest answer to what a pattern is made of. It is made of relationship. It is made of the arrangement of the stuff, not the stuff. The wave is a fact about how the water is organized from one moment to the next. Take away the water and you have no wave. That is true. But the wave was never any particular water. Scoop out a bucketful right where the crest is passing, and the crest does not come up in your bucket. It just keeps going, using the next water and the next, borrowing each parcel for an instant and handing it back. Now hold that picture in your mind, because that is very close to what you are. Not close as a poetry, close as a physics. When I told you earlier that the atoms come into the brain and dance a dance and then leave, always new atoms doing the same dance, I was describing a standing wave that happens to be able to think about itself. The dance is the pattern. The atoms are the water. You have been convinced your whole life that you are the water, that you are a certain lump of matter walking around, and it is a very natural thing to believe, because the lump seems to stay put. You look in the mirror in the morning and there is the same face. But the face in the mirror is a crest that keeps moving forward on borrowed water. The carbon that spelled out your thoughts a year ago is out in the world somewhere, in the air, in a leaf, in another animal, and new carbon has taken its place, standing where the old carbon stood, holding the same shape. Let me make this less abstract, because I want you to feel it in your bones before you drift off. Consider a candle flame. A flame is one of the loveliest patterns there is, and it teaches almost everything. Look at a candle burning quietly on a table. The flame has a shape. It has a color. It has a top and a bottom, a bright part and a dim part, and it holds that shape steadily for hours. You could point at it and say, there is the flame, as though it were a thing. But nothing in the flame stays. Wax climbs the wick, turns to vapor, the vapor tears apart and burns, hot gas rushes up and away, carrying soot and light and heat, and fresh vapor comes up behind it to burn in the same place. The flame is a shape that fire makes while matter pours through it. It is a waterfall of burning gas frozen into a form. Every atom you see glowing was somewhere else a heartbeat ago and will be gone a heartbeat from now. The shape stays. The stuff runs through, and here is the thing that ought to keep you gently turning it over as you fall asleep. A living body is exactly this kind of flame, only slower and far more intricate. You are a flame that took millions of years to learn its shape. Food goes in, air goes in, and they burn, not with a visible fire, but with a slow controlled chemistry that releases the very same energy of firewood, just parceled out carefully, joule by joule, at body warmth. The waste heat pours off you constantly, about the warmth of a 100-watt bulb into the room, into the air. You are burning right now, quietly, and you have been burning since before you were born, and the burning is not a threat to you, the burning is you. The pattern is the flame. When the fuel and the air keep coming, the flame holds its shape and calls itself alive. When they stop, the flame does not go anywhere. There is no little flame that escapes up the chimney and floats off intact. The flame simply is not being made any longer. The shape stops being drawn. That word drawn is the one I want you to hold. A pattern is not a thing that sits there. A pattern is a thing that is being continuously performed. The wave is being performed by the water over and over, crest after crest. The flame is being performed by the burning gas, and you are being performed, moment to moment, by 7 octillion atoms carrying out an unbelievably elaborate routine, checking each other, signaling each other, rebuilding each other faster than they wear out. Every heartbeat is a bar of the music. The routine remembers itself. That is the astonishing part. Yesterday's dance tells today's atoms where to stand. The pattern hands itself forward in time, teaching each new set of particles the steps so that the shape persists even though the dancers are all replaced. A song is not the air it is carried on. A song is the ordering of the notes, and the air only trembles to let you hear it. Stop the singer and the air is all still there, every molecule of it, not one lost. What ended was the singing. So when we ask, in our careful bookkeeping way, where does the energy go when a person dies, we have quietly asked 2 completely different questions and let them wear the same coat, and this is the very confusion I promised you at the start we would drag out into the light. One question is about the water. The other is about the wave. The energy, the atoms, the stuff, the ingredients, all of that belongs to the water. And the water is fine. Not one drop of it is lost. We can chase every joule, and we will, in a little while, down every path it takes out of that quiet room. But the pattern, the dance, the arrangement that was doing the remembering and the wondering, that belongs to the wave. And the wave is not a substance at all. So it cannot leak away as a substance, it cannot be stored in a jar, it cannot go up the chimney and float off across the fields, it can only be performed or not performed. While it was performed, it was as real as the flame, as real as the song. When the performing stops, there is nothing left over of that kind to account for, because it was never a quantity in the first place. It was a happening. This is why the 2 great laws can both be perfectly satisfied and a whole life still be over, and there is no contradiction hiding anywhere in it, only our own habit of expecting the wave to be a piece of the water. The first law counts the water and finds it all present. The second law watches the arrangement fall from a rare and delicate order into the common blur and explains why the performance could not be kept up forever on borrowed orderliness. Neither law ever promised that the dance would go on. The dance was never one of the conserved things. Energy is conserved, charge is conserved, momentum is conserved. The particular way 7 octillion atoms are arranged so as to fall in love and dread the dark and remember a summer afternoon, that is conserved by nothing. Nature made no such promise, and it kept every promise it did make. Now I can hear the objection, and it is a good one. It is the objection a sharp student always raises about here, leaning forward a little. You will say, all right, the pattern is not a substance, fine. But surely the pattern is a kind of information. And information is physical, you have told us so yourself. It lives in the arrangement of matter, it takes real energy to erase it. So does the information go somewhere. Is it conserved too? And that is a beautiful question, one of the deepest we can ask, and I am not going to give it a cheap answer tonight, because it deserves better, and because we are going to circle back to it more than once before we are through. But let me plant the first seed of it now, gently, something to turn over in the dark. The arrangement of your atoms at the moment the dance stops is, in one strict physical sense, still written into the world. The atoms fly apart, they scatter into the air and the soil, they carry their little histories with them, the way ripples carry the memory of the stone that fell in. In principle, In the coldest, most theoretical sense a physicist can mean the word, the information about how they were arranged is not destroyed, it is only smeared out, spread so thin across so many particles and so many miles that no power on this earth could ever read it back or gather it up again. It is scrambled past all unscrambling. And whether a thing that is perfectly preserved and perfectly unreadable forever by anyone should be called still here or should be called gone, that is not a question physics has finished answering, and I would be lying to you if I pretended otherwise. Hold on to it. We will come back to it when we go down to the very bottom where the fields are and ask what, if anything, has your name on it at all. For now it is enough to see the shape of the whole puzzle at last. The water stays, the wave was never water. And the thing we have been mourning was always and only a wave. Let me take you into that cooling room now, gently, and follow the heat itself, because heat is the first thing that leaves, and it leaves in a way you can almost watch. A living body sits at about 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. The room around it, let us say, sits at 70. There is a difference there, and nature does not tolerate a difference like that quietly. Every warm object pours light out of itself all the time, invisible light, down in the infrared where your eyes cannot follow it, but the skin on the back of your hand can feel it when you hold your hand near a stove without touching. That glow never stops. While you are alive, you keep feeding it. You burn your breakfast, you burn the air you breathe, you run a little furnace in every one of your cells, and the furnace tops the temperature back up as fast as the glow drains it away. That is what the warmth of a living hand really is. It is not a fixed thing you own. It is a fountain, endlessly refilled, and the refilling is the living. Stop the furnace, and the fountain does not stop. It simply stops being refilled. The glow keeps pouring out, infrared light streaming from the skin into the air, into the sheets, into the floorboards, into the cool plaster of the walls. Slowly the body slides down from 98 towards 70, an hour, 2 hours, and more, and every fraction of a degree it loses is not lost at all. It has gone into the room. The air is a whisker warmer. The bed is a whisker warmer. And that warmth spreads to the next room and out through the window glass and up into the night sky, thinning and thinning until you could no longer find it with any instrument ever built. But thinning is not vanishing. If you could add up every scrap of that warmth, every stirred molecule of air, every faint pulse of infrared that left through the window and is now on its way past the moon at the speed of light, 186,000 miles every second, and you laid them all end to end on the ledger, the sum would come out exactly right. Not approximately. Exactly. The heat that was in the body is the heat that is now in the world. This is one of Feynman's 9 faces, the one he called heat energy, and beside it its twin, radiant energy, the light itself. Both accounted for, both conserved. Every joule with a forwarding address. Now walk with me down the second path, which is slower and stranger and I think more beautiful, because it is chemistry and chemistry is patient. Inside the body, even after the warmth has fled, there is a great store of energy locked up tight, held not in motion but in arrangement. Somewhere between 126 and 320 megajoules of it by the honest estimates we have, and I want you to feel how much that is. A megajoule is not a small thing. The fat alone gives up something like 37 kilojoules for every single gram, which is why fat is such a marvelous way to carry fuel around, and why a body carries so much of it. All of that energy is sitting there in the bonds between atoms, in the way a carbon atom clasps hands with its neighbors, in the folded loops of proteins and the long chains of fat and the rings of sugar. It is like a house of matches all built up into a tower. The energy is not in any one match. It is in the standing upness of the whole thing. And here come the bacteria. They were always there, waiting in the gut and the soil and the air, and now, with the furnace cold and the defenses gone, they set to work with tremendous enthusiasm. What they are doing, when you strip away every other word for it, is eating. They break the bonds. They knock the tower of matches down, one clasped pair of hands at a time, and every time a bond breaks and reforms into something lower and calmer, A little parcel of energy comes loose, and the bacteria pocket it and use it to live and to multiply and to break still more bonds. That 37 kilojoules a gram does not evaporate into nothing. It becomes bacterial life. It becomes heat again, a faint warmth of decomposition you could measure with a careful thermometer. It becomes the chemical work of building new tiny bodies out of the pieces of the old large one. The chemical energy form, Feynman's sixth phase, hands itself over to the living world, and the bookkeeping once again closes to the last decimal. Nothing is spent that is not received. Follow it one more step along the third path and watch where those atoms and that liberated energy actually go, because this is where the whole argument turns from arithmetic into something that ought to make you glad. The bacteria do not keep it forever. They die too, and are eaten in turn, and the atoms that were once arranged into a hand or a thought move down into the soil. There they meet the roots. A plant is a machine, the loveliest machine there is, for grabbing loose atoms and loose energy and standing them back up into order. The root drinks in the nitrogen that was your protein. The leaf drinks in the carbon that was your breath, pulled from the air where the bacteria exhaled it. Sunlight pours energy back into new bonds, builds a new tower of matches, a stem, a leaf, a seed. And a rabbit eats the leaf, and something eats the rabbit, and the carbon that was briefly, gloriously arranged into a person is now arranged into a meadow and a mouse and the wing of a moth going by in the dark. This is exactly the sentence Feynman said he would save above all others if all our science were to be wiped away in some catastrophe and he could pass on only one line to whoever came after. That everything is made of atoms, little particles that move about in perpetual motion. Perpetual. Not resting motion. Not motion that stops at a graveside. The atoms that were in the brain yesterday are in the soil today and in a blade of grass by summer, and they do not know or care which arrangement they are passing through. They were never yours to keep. They were on loan, every single one, 7 octillion of them, 7 followed by 27 zeros, and you were for a little while the shape they were asked to hold. The atoms come into the brain, he wrote, they dance their dance, and then they go out again, always new atoms but always doing the same dance, remembering what the dance was yesterday. Even while you lived, they were leaving and being replaced. The you of 10 years ago is made of almost none of the same particles as the you of today. So the strange thing I have to tell you is not that the atoms scatter at the end. The strange thing is that they were always scattering, always flowing through. And the flowing was never the enemy of you. The flowing was you. You were a standing wave in a river that never stopped moving, and calling that an ending is like standing at the bank and mourning because the water going past your feet is not the same water that went past a moment ago. Of course it is not. It never was. And the river is no less a river for it. So now we have come around by 3 separate roads to the same honest place, and I want to set us back down in front of the hardest question of all, the one I asked you to hold. If the heat is conserved, and the chemistry is conserved, and the atoms are conserved and merely go dancing off to join new patterns, then what, precisely, was lost? Something was lost. I will not stand here and pretend the room feels the same with the person gone from it. What was lost was the arrangement. The recipe, as Carroll put it so plainly. Physics keeps the ingredients, he said, but it does not preserve the recipe. Every atom stays on the books. Every joule finds its forwarding address. But the particular, improbable, staggeringly unlikely way those atoms were stacked, the low entropy tower that could remember yesterday and lean toward tomorrow, that arrangement comes apart and does not, by itself, reassemble. And this is where Schrödinger walks back into the room, from his wartime lectures in Dublin, with the deepest thing anyone has said about being alive. A living thing, he saw, is not a thing that has escaped the general downhill slide of the world. It is a thing that is falling downhill just as fast as everything else, and paying moment by moment to keep a small pocket of order standing up inside the tumble. It does this by drinking order in from outside, from food, from sunlight, from the structured world, and pouring disorder back out into the surroundings as waste and heat. He called it feeding on orderliness, sucking order from the environment to hold your own small order together. And the terrible and clean consequence is this: when the feeding stops, The small pocket of order simply joins the general slide. The organism comes into equilibrium with everything around it. And coming into equilibrium, he said, is only another way of saying it dies. There is no extra death particle. There is no separate thing that breaks. There is only the ceasing of a borrowing that was always going on, a debt of order that life pays every second, and that at the end is simply no longer paid. The books close because the payments stop. But the books, mark this, the books still balance. They balance to the penny. The order that was here is now spread out there. The entropy that the body kept pushed away has finally been allowed to flood in and level everything smooth, and even that flooding, even that final smoothing, is watched over and governed by the first law, so that not one jewel goes missing in the leveling. Hold all three of these in your mind at once as you drift, because they do not fight each other. The heat leaves and is conserved. The chemistry unwinds and is conserved. The atoms scatter into new dances and are conserved. And what ends is none of these. What ends is only the improbable standing upness, the wave, the pattern, the dance that could remember. And we still have not gone down to the very bottom, to the fields underneath the atoms, to ask whether that pattern is truly erased, or only, as I hinted, scrambled past all reading. That is the last door, and it is the strangest one, and we will open it slowly. So let us go down. Let us go down past the atoms, quietly, the way you would walk down a stairway in a dark house when everyone else is asleep, one step at a time, feeling for the next stair with your foot before you trust it. We spent a long while up above, in the world of things you can weigh and things you can pour, the world where a body has a temperature and a mass and a smell. Now we are leaving that world. We are going to the place I spent the best years of my working life, the place I was given a prize for in the year 1965, together with two other men, Julian Schwinger and Shinichiro Tomonaga, for a thing with a long name, quantum electrodynamics. It is a mouthful. Forget the name. What matters is what it says about you, and about what is left of you, and whether the word left even means anything down here. Up in the ordinary world we talked as if you owned your atoms. My carbon, we said. The oxygen in my blood, as if each little particle had your name scratched onto it, the way a child scratches his initials into the paint of a bench so the other children will know whose bench it is. I let you keep talking that way for hours, because it is a comfortable way to talk and it does no harm in the daylight. But it is not true, and down here it falls apart completely, and I want to show you how gently it falls apart, because there is something beautiful hiding inside the falling. Consider one electron, just one, from the outer edge of one carbon atom, somewhere in what used to be the tip of your thumb. Now consider another electron, from a puddle of rainwater in a field in a country you have never visited. Here is the strange thing, and it is not a poem, it is the plainest fact we have, tested more carefully than almost anything in all of science. Those two electrons are not similar. They are not nearly the same. They are the same, in a way that no two things in the ordinary world are ever the same. They have exactly the same mass, to as many decimal places as we can measure, and we can measure a great many. Exactly the same charge, exactly the same everything. There is no scratch of initials on either one. There is no little serial number stamped on the side. If I were to take your electron and the raindrop's electron and swap them while you blinked, there would be no measurement, none, not now and not ever, that could tell me I had done it. The universe itself keeps no record of which was which. Think about what that means for the whole idea of ownership. All the long afternoon we have been tracking your atoms like a careful accountant, following the heat out the window, following the carbon into the soil, following the water into the roots of the grass. And that accounting is true. Every joule of it, I stand by all of it. But when we go this far down, the very last thing we were still holding on to, the idea that these were your particular particles, your personal little marbles that had been loyal to you for a lifetime, that idea simply evaporates. They were never yours. They were only ever borrowed from a common pile, a pile shared by every living thing and every dead star and every drop of the sea, and while you were alive they took their turns spelling out the pattern that was you. And when you die they go back to the pile, unmarked, unremembered, ready to spell out something else. You do not lose your atoms at death. You never had them to lose. You had the use of them the way you have the use of the words in a language. The words were here before you and they will be here after, and all you ever did, all any of us ever does, is arrange them for a while into a sentence that had never been spoken before and will never be spoken again. Now go one floor lower still, because there is a lower floor, and this is the one that took us the prize to understand, and it is the strangest room in the whole house. I have been letting you picture the electron as a tiny hard thing, a speck, a grain of sand too small to see. That picture is good enough for the daylight world. Down here it is wrong. Down here there is no speck. What there is instead is a field. Think of the whole of space. The room you are lying in, the sky, the space between here and the farthest star, as filled everywhere with something like the surface of a very calm pond that goes on forever. Not water. Do not take the water too seriously. But something that feels everywhere and can ripple. And an electron, one electron, your electron, is not a marble sitting on that pond. It is a ripple in the pond. It is a place where the field is standing up a little humped up bit of excitement in a stuff that is spread through all of space. Do you feel how that changes the question we came down here to ask? We came down to ask whether the pattern that was you is truly erased or only scrambled beyond any reading. And now look what the particles themselves have become. They were never little permanent objects. They were always ripples, disturbances, excitements in fields that fill everything. A ripple is a pattern too. A ripple is a dance the pond does. When a wave comes up onto the sand and flattens out and is gone, you do not say the water was destroyed. The water is right there, all of it, not one drop missing. What ended was the standing upness of it, the particular shape it held for a moment against the flatness. And that is exactly the same thing I have been telling you about you all afternoon in bigger and bigger words. You are a shape the fields are holding for a moment against the flatness. Not the water, the wave, not the pile of shared unmarked particles. The arrangement. All the way down at every floor of the house we have walked through tonight, the answer keeps rhyming with itself. Ingredients, not recipe. Dances, not dance. Pond, not wave. The universe keeps the stuff and lets go of the shape over and over at every scale, and it has been doing this in front of us the whole time in 100 disguises, and only now, down here in the dark at the bottom, do we see it was one single fact wearing 100 masks. So is the pattern truly erased? Here I have to be honest with you the way I was honest at the very start, and I will not pretend to know a thing I do not know. In the ordinary sense, yes. The particular ripple that could remember yesterday, that could love someone, that could be bored even by its own dying, that particular standing wave comes down and flattens and does not stand back up. That is real. I am not going to sweeten it. But notice what the fields refuse to let us say. They will not let us say the information went nowhere, that it dropped clean out of the world. Because down here nothing drops clean out of the world. The heat that left the room is still out there, jostling the air, jostling the walls, spreading, thinning. But there, every joule of it, exactly as the first law swore to us hours ago. And the finest details of how you were arranged, the exact way one field stood up against another in the wet dark of your brain, those details do not get burned out of existence either. They get smeared. They get shuffled out into the heat and the light and the scatter until no hand could ever gather them back and read them. Scrambled past all reading. That is not the same as erased, though from where we sit, unable to read the scramble, it feels like the same thing. And for all the practical purposes of a life and a death, it is the same thing. I want you to sit in that gap for a while as you drift, the gap between erased and merely scrambled. Because it is a real gap, and honest physics lives inside it and does not pretend the gap is closed. We do not know how to read the scramble. We may never. It is possible in principle that the world remembers everything and forgives us for being unable to remember with it. It is possible that the bookkeeping is perfect all the way down, that not one bit of what you were is truly gone, only folded so many times into the general warmth that no one will ever unfold it. I find that neither frightening nor comforting. I find it simply true, or as near to true as we have gotten, and I have never needed a fact to comfort me before I would agree to look at it squarely. And there is one more flaw, or rather there is the question of whether the wave was ever separate from the pond to begin with, whether the boundary we keep drawing around you, the line between the atoms with your name on them and the atoms without, was ever a line the universe itself agreed to draw, or only a line we drew for our own convenience, the way we draw a border across a river on a map and the river pays it no mind and keeps flowing across. We have taken the atoms apart into fields. Tomorrow, so to speak, still in this same long night, we will ask what those fields are doing when nobody is dying at all, when they are just humming along being an ordinary rock, an ordinary breath, and whether the same accounting that survives your death was already quietly at work inside every second you were alive, so that in some sense the death was never a special event to the physics, only to you. But that is for the next slow turning of this talk, and there is no hurry, none at all, and the pond is very calm, and every jewel is still exactly where the law says it must be. So let me pick up that thread about the fields, because it is one of the loveliest ideas we have, and it is the sort of thing that is nice to think about with your eyes closed. When I say the atoms have dissolved into fields, I mean something very particular, and I want to say it slowly so it does not sound like a magic trick. Imagine the whole of space, every last corner of it, the space inside your chest and the space between the stars, filled with something like an enormous invisible sheet stretched tight. Not one sheet, but many laid over each other. There is a sheet for the electrons, and a sheet for the light, and a sheet for each kind of particle we know. And a particle, one single electron, is nothing more than a little ripple, a little humming disturbance, standing up out of its sheet. Pluck the sheet in one spot and a ripple appears, and we give that ripple a name, and we say there is an electron. But the ripple is not a separate thing sitting on the sheet. It is the sheet doing something. It is a shape the sheet is holding for a while. Now think about what that does to the whole question we have been circling all night. We kept asking, where did your energy go? Where did your atoms go? Whose are they now? But if the atoms are only ripples in a sheet that stretches everywhere at once, then the question of whose ripple it is starts to sound a little funny. A wave on the ocean does not belong to 1 gallon of water. It passes through the water. The water bobs up and down and stays more or less where it was, and the wave travels on. And nobody stands on the beach demanding to know which particular wave is the real one, the original, the one with the birth certificate. The waves are just what the ocean is doing. And you, the whole warm, complicated bag of you, were just what these fields were doing, in one small region, for a little while, in a very particular pattern. I find this comforting, and I will tell you why, though you are welcome to disagree with me from inside your blanket. When I was younger, I think I imagined energy as a kind of fluid, a stuff, poured into me at birth and slowly leaking out until the tank ran dry, and death was the tank hitting empty. But that is exactly the picture the blocks were meant to destroy. There are no blocks, I told you, and there is no fluid either. There is only a number that nature keeps constant, and a set of patterns that the fields are allowed to make, and the patterns come and go while the number underneath never so much as flickers. Your tank never ran dry. There was no tank. The energy that animated you did not drain away into nothing at the end. It changed its address. It stopped being the pattern called you and became 1,000 humbler patterns, warmth in the air, motion in the small living things, chemistry loosening in the soil, and every one of those patterns is a ripple in the same sheet you were a ripple in. You did not leave the ocean. You could not leave it if you tried. There is nowhere that is not the ocean. Let me put a small puzzle to you, the kind I like to chew on when I cannot sleep, and maybe it will do the same gentle work for you. Suppose you could count. Suppose you had a magic ledger, and at the very last instant of a life you wrote down every single jewel and exactly where it sat, and then you followed each one patiently for 100 years. The heat that slipped into the room, you would follow it into the walls, and out of the walls into the night air, and up into the sky, and some of it, believe it or not, radiated away from the earth entirely, out past the moon, out into the cold dark, where it is still traveling right now and will travel essentially forever, carrying its tiny share of the total, never spent, never lost, just spread thinner and thinner across a bigger and bigger stage. And the chemical energy, you would follow that down into the roots of things, up into a stalk of grass, into the body of a rabbit, into the muscle that lets the rabbit run. And the atoms themselves you would follow the same way. Because remember, the atoms are not destroyed either, they are as good as immortal on the scale of any life. The carbon that spelled a word in somebody's brain is patient. It has been a diamond, maybe, and a lump of coal, and the breath of some creature that lived when the continents were in different places, and it will be 100 things more after the grass and the rabbit, and it is in no hurry, and it keeps none of its old jobs as a keepsake. That is the thing I keep coming back to, that the universe is thrifty in a way that has nothing to do with sentiment. It is not thrifty because it loves you and wants to save a piece of you. It is thrifty because the law simply will not let anything be thrown away. The first law does not make exceptions for the sad occasions. It does not soften. It does not, on the other hand, punish. It just keeps counting. The same at a deathbed as at a bonfire as at the birth of a star, 28 blocks, 28 blocks, 28 blocks, forever and in every room, whether anyone is watching or not. And here is where I want to be honest with you, more honest than the comfortable version usually is, because I promised at the start of this long night that I would not hand you a sweet with nothing inside it. The energy is conserved. The atoms are conserved. Say it as many times as you like, it stays true. But the pattern is not conserved, and the pattern was the part you actually cared about. When you say you do not want to die, you are not, I think, worried about your oxygen atoms. You do not lie awake grieving for your calcium. You are worried about the arrangement, the particular way the dance was danced. The memory of yesterday's dance carried into today, which was the one genuinely fragile, genuinely rare, genuinely precious thing in the whole arrangement. And that the physics does not save. That is the recipe, and the recipe is not written in any conserved quantity. It is written only in the arrangement itself, and when the arrangement lets go, the recipe is simply gone, the way a melody is gone when the orchestra stops, even though every violin and every ounce of air in the hall is still exactly precisely there. So we are left holding two true things at once, and I do not think we should rush to make them agree, because part of what I have loved about physics my whole life is that it lets you hold two true things at once and not flinch. The first true thing is that nothing about you is destroyed. Not one joule, not one atom, not one flicker of the field. You are, in the most literal accounting the universe knows how to keep, permanent. The second true thing is that the you that you mean, the pattern, the dance, the little standing ripple that remembered its own name, is temporary, and was always temporary, and was temporary even while it lasted, because it was being rebuilt out of fresh atoms every single day it existed. You never were a permanent thing pretending to be temporary. You were a temporary pattern made out of permanent stuff, which is a very different, and I think a much stranger and more beautiful situation to be in. Sit with that a moment, in the dark, with the pond still calm. The stuff of you is eternal and does not know your name. The pattern of you knew your name intimately and does not last. Neither one is the whole truth of you. You were the meeting place of the two, the spot where the everlasting fields agreed, briefly, to hold a shape that could sit up and ask what it was made of. That is not a small thing to have been. Matter almost never does that. For billions of years, these same fields rippled along being hydrogen and helium and the insides of stars and the cold of empty space, and in all that vastness, only in the rarest, dampest, most sheltered little corners did the ripples ever fold themselves into a pattern that could look back and wonder. You were one of those corners. The wondering was the whole point, and the wondering while it lasted was real. Now let me turn the lamp a little, toward the question I promised, the one about whether death was ever a special event to the physics at all, or only to us. Because I have been letting you assume that death is the moment the pattern breaks, one clean edge, before and after. And I want to gently take even that away from you, not to trouble your sleep, but because I think the truth underneath is calmer than the story we tell. The atoms in your brain, I said, come in and dance and leave. Always new atoms doing the old dance. That was not a poem about death. That was a fact about every ordinary Tuesday of your life. The you of a decade ago is, in raw material, almost entirely gone already, gone into the air and the water and the world, replaced quietly while you were busy living. and you never felt the substitution. You never missed the atoms that left. You signed no forms. So the great redistribution that we are so solemn about at the end, the scattering of the stuff, the handing back of the borrowed material to the world, that was happening the entire time, in small change, every hour, and you called it being alive. Death did not invent the outflow. Death only stopped the matching inflow. The resupply, the sucking of freshness from the world that Schrödinger told us was the real work of staying alive. And once we see it that way, the wall between the living pattern and the scattering after it starts to look less like a cliff and more like a slope you are always, gently, walking down. Let me take you into that quiet room now, the one we started with, and let me do the thing a physicist does that nobody else in the room wants to do. Let me count. The body lying there was warm, a little under 99 degrees Fahrenheit, and the room is cooler, say 70. That difference, that little gap of temperature, is not nothing. It is a debt the universe is going to collect, calmly, patiently, over the next hours. Heat always flows from the warm thing to the cool thing, never the other way on its own, and so the warmth begins to leave. It leaves in two ways, and I want you to see both, because both are just energy changing its coat, never vanishing. The first way is touch, what we call conduction and convection, the plain handing off of jiggling from atom to neighboring atom. The skin is warm, the air against the skin is cooler, and the fast little motions of the warm atoms bump the slow ones and speed them up, and those bump the next ones, and a slow tide of warmth spreads into the air, and the air, now warmer, drifts upward and lets cooler air slide in to take its turn. If you could see it, you would see a soft, invisible plume rising off the body for hours, the last exhalation of stored motion, going up toward the ceiling, spreading through the whole room, warming it by an amount so small no thermometer in your kitchen would ever notice. But it is there. Every bit of it is there. The room is very slightly warmer for a while because a person was in it. That is not sentiment. That is bookkeeping. The second way is light. And here is something people never think about. You are glowing right now. You, sitting there listening to me, you are pouring light out of your skin in every direction all the time. Not light your eyes can see, but infrared light, the long, slow, red beyond red glow that every warm thing gives off simply because it is warm. Warm atoms carry electric charge in them, and charges that jiggle send out electromagnetic waves, and so everything with a temperature above the deep cold of empty space shines. You shine. A cooling body shines a little less as it cools, and every one of those infrared waves sails out across the room and sinks into the walls, the floor, the window glass, carrying away its little parcel of energy and warming those things by a whisper. This is Feynman's radiant energy, one of his 9 faces, the same family as the light of the sun and the warmth of a fire, only gentler. And notice, please notice, that it is completely traceable. In principle, you could stand in that room with the right instruments and account for every joule as it went. This much into the air, this much into the walls, this much streaming out the window into the night sky and onward eventually into the cold of space itself. Nothing is hidden. Nothing is lost. The heat that was organized inside a living animal, holding a temperature steady against the pull of the cold, simply spreads out and joins the general warmth of the world, until the body and the room agree on a single number, and the debt is paid and the flowing stops. Schrödinger's equilibrium, the thing we so heavily call death, seen up close with a thermometer, is a warm object quietly coming to the same temperature as its room. Now that is only the heat, and the heat is the small account. The large account is chemical, and it does not leave in hours. It leaves over seasons, and it leaves through the mouths of the living. Think of what is stored in there. Somewhere between 126 and 320 megajoules of chemical energy, locked in the bonds of fat and protein and the last of the sugars, roughly 37 kilojoules in every single gram of body fat, which is a genuinely enormous density of fuel, more energy per gram than gunpowder holds, sitting there patiently in the tissues. In life, that fuel was burned slowly, controlled, sipped, a candle rather than a bonfire, oxygen brought in by the blood to unlock it a little at a time to keep the whole pattern running. When the breathing stops, the sipping stops. But the fuel does not evaporate. It is still there, every jewel of it in the bonds. And the world is very, very hungry for bonds like that. Within the body already, and then from the soil, and then from the air, come the bacteria and the fungi. The great patient population of decomposers whose entire way of life is to find stored chemical energy and take it apart. They are, in the most literal sense, eating the energy. When a bacterium breaks a fat molecule, it is doing exactly what your own cells did, cracking the chemical bonds and pocketing the difference, using that energy to build itself, to move, to make more bacteria. The fat that was yours becomes the warmth and the motion and the substance of 10,000 tiny lives, and they in turn are eaten and their bonds pass along again. The energy is not released into nothing. It is passed hand to hand down a line that never ends, from the body to the microbe to the worm to the root, and every handoff, every single one obeys the counting rule. The bonds that break give up exactly as much as the new bonds and the new motion and the new heat take on. Dennis still has his 28 blocks. You will never find 27. You will never find 29. You cannot cheat this game even in a grave. And so the chemical energy that was a person flows over months and years into the soil, and the soil is not a wall where things go to stop. The soil is a marketplace, a churning intersection, where the atoms and their energy change owners constantly. A root reaches down into that enriched dark and drinks. A plant, using the free daylight pouring in from the sun, takes carbon that was once breathing in a chest and builds it into a leaf, into a stem, into a seed. The nitrogen that was in the proteins of a hand becomes the nitrogen in the green machinery of a growing thing. And a season later, an animal eats the plant, and the pattern is running again in a new body, with new borders, calling itself by a new name, utterly unaware that some of its atoms once wandered about the stars. This is the atomic hypothesis wearing its most tender face. Remember the one sentence Feynman said he would save if all other knowledge were lost, that everything is made of little particles in perpetual, ceaseless motion. Perpetual. Not motion that pauses at a funeral. The atoms of a living body were never at rest, and they do not begin resting at the end. They go on jiggling, dancing, wandering out of the tissues and into the air and the water and the ground, and they carry their energy with them wherever they go, and they simply cannot stop, because stopping is not a thing atoms know how to do. What we call the boundary of a body, the skin, the edge where you stop and the world begins, was never a real wall to an atom. It was a turnstile, always turning, atoms in, atoms out, all your life. Death jams the turnstile in the open position and takes the ticket taker home. That is all. The traffic continues. And here, I want to slip in the thing that unsettles people most, the quiet ownership problem, because it makes all of this both stranger and easier. Suppose you tried to hold on to your atoms. Suppose you said, "Those are mine, I want them back, I want to keep the very particles that were me." You could not even tell them apart. At the deepest level that Feynman spent his life mapping, the level that won the Nobel Prize in 1965 for the theory of light and matter, every electron in the universe is precisely perfectly identical to every other electron. Not similar, not nearly the same. Identical, with no feature, no scratch, no serial number that could ever mark one as yours. The hydrogen in your body, and remember that by sheer count of atoms you are more hydrogen than anything else, well over half of you by the head count of particles, that hydrogen is the same hydrogen that is in the ocean and the comet and the star. There is no such thing at the deepest level as your particular atom. There are only the patterns that atoms briefly fall into. The particles are the universes, on loan, always to everyone in turn. So when we ask, with such heaviness, what happens to your energy after you die, we have quietly smuggled a false little word into the question, and the word is your. The energy was never a private possession locked in a vault behind your ribs. It was a flow passing through you, lighting you up the way the current lights a bulb. And the bulb does not own the electricity, and you did not own the joules. You were a place the energy was passing through in a particularly beautiful and complicated way, a place where it was made for a while to dance in the shape of a wondering, worrying, laughing person. And when the dancing shape lets go, the energy does not even hesitate. It was already on its way through you before the question was asked. It is simply at last allowed to continue without carrying the extraordinary burden of being someone. Let me sit with that word a little longer, this word your, because it has fooled better minds than mine. When you were a small child and someone handed you a balloon, you held the string and you said, "This is my balloon," and in a certain plain sense you were right. But suppose you had held instead a little gust of warm air rising off a candle. Suppose you had tried to say, "This warmth is mine, I own it, I will keep it." You would have felt at once how silly that is. The warmth is only passing. It came from the flame, it will go to the ceiling, and for one moment it happened to press against your palm. You were never its owner. You were the place it touched on the way up. And here is the quiet thing I want you to feel as you drift, tonight, towards sleep. Your whole life, the whole warm, complicated business of being you, was much more like the gust than like the balloon. You were the touching, not the keeping. So follow the warmth out of the room with me. The body has cooled now. It began at about 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit, and it is sliding down toward the temperature of the air around it, and every fraction of a degree it loses is a story with a perfect ending, because that heat does not vanish. It walks out into the world along 3 roads at once, and physics has walked all 3 of them and counted every step. The first road is the plain touch of one thing against another. The skin rests against the sheet against the mattress against the frame against the floor, and heat, which is nothing but the jiggling of atoms, passes the jiggle along, atom nudging atom, the way a whisper passes down a long row of children until the far child giggles. That is conduction, and not one bit of the jiggle is lost in the passing. It is only handed on. The second road is the stirring of the air. The air right against the warm body grows a touch warmer, and warm air is loose air, spread out air, lighter air, and so it lifts ever so gently, and cooler air slides in underneath to take its place, and that new air warms and lifts in its turn. There is a slow, invisible fountain rising off any warm thing, a soft convection you have felt 1,000 times over a radiator or a mug of tea, and it is rising off the still body now, carrying the heat up and away into the whole volume of the room, mixing it, sharing it, until the room itself is imperceptibly, immeasurably warmer than it would have been, and the heat that was gathered into one human shape is smeared out into the thin general warmth of a place. Still counted, still every joule of it somewhere. The third road is the strangest and the loveliest, and it does not need the air or the sheet or anything at all. Every warm object glows, not with light your eye can catch, but with light all the same. A deep, low infrared glow that streams straight off the surface and crosses the room at the speed of light and soaks into the far wall and the cool window pane and the back of a chair. This is radiant energy, one of the 9 faces, the same face the sun wears when it warms your cheek across 93 million miles of empty nothing. The body cooling is a faint dim sun. It is shining. In the dark, if you had the right eyes, the eyes of certain snakes who hunt by warmth, you would see it shining, softly, a portrait painted in heat, growing dimmer as the hours pass, sketched onto the walls in light too red for us to see, and then fading, and then gone. Because the picture has finished pouring itself out into the room. The room drank the light. The light was never destroyed, it was only received. 3 roads, and the accountant of the first law of thermodynamics stands at the door with a ledger and watches the heat leave along all 3, and at the bottom of the page the sum comes out exactly to the last decimal. Because it must. Because in all the manifold changes nature undergoes, that certain quantity we call energy does not change. The blocks are all there. You cannot see them. There are no blocks. But the count is 28, and it is always 28, and it was 28 before you were born, and it will be 28 in the year the sun swells up and swallows the earth, and no experiment anyone has ever done in all the careful history of measuring things has caught it being 27 or 29. That is not a small fact. That is possibly the largest fact we have. Now, some of the energy did not leave as heat at all, because a body is not only warm, a body is built. A body is a cathedral of chemistry, and the mortar of that cathedral is the chemical bond. When two atoms hold hands to make a molecule, there is energy tucked into the handshake, and a living body is nothing but handshakes upon handshakes, fats and sugars and the long folded ropes of protein, all of them holding their shape by holding on. In life you kept building and unbuilding these, spending a river of energy every single day just to stay in one piece, and now the building has stopped, but the chemistry has not, because chemistry does not care whether you are alive. The bacteria arrive, and they are very interested in all those handshakes, and they begin patiently to break them, and every broken bond that gives up a little energy gives it to them, feeds them, warms them, lets them multiply and break the next bond and the next. Think of what is stored there. Somewhere between 126 and 320 megajoules, the honest estimates say, and I want you to hold the size of that gently, because it does not feel like much when you say the word, but the fat alone gives up something like 37 kilojoules in every single gram, and a body is a generous larder. That energy was going to be spent slowly, over a life, one heartbeat and one thought and one climbed staircase at a time. Now it is spent all at once, in the slow burn of decay, which is really just a very patient fire with no flame, oxidizing the same molecules a candle would, releasing the same warmth a meal would, only handing it not to you, but to the small hungry lives that inherit you. The chemical energy that would have carried you up a hill next spring carries a colony of decomposers through a summer instead. The bookkeeping does not even notice the change of address. The bonds broke, the energy came out, something drank it. 28. And where do the atoms go once the handshakes are undone and the pieces are loose again? They go where atoms have always gone, which is everywhere, which is onward. This is the part the little boy who once got the single most important sentence from the ashes of a ruined science would have loved. Because here it is, plain in front of us. All things are made of atoms, and the atoms are in perpetual motion, and that perpetual is not a poem, it is a description. The carbon that was your fingertip does not retire. It joins the air as a breath of carbon dioxide, or it sinks into the soil, and a root finds it and draws it up a stem, and a leaf catches a photon and welds that carbon into sugar, and the sugar builds the leaf, and a caterpillar eats the leaf, and a bird eats the caterpillar, and the bird is singing on a wire in a country you never visited, built in part out of an atom that once helped you hold a spoon. That is not sentiment. I am not trying to comfort you with a story. I am telling you the plainest chemistry there is. The atoms move from body to soil, to root, to leaf, to wing, and they never stop, and they were only ever borrowed, and the lending library never closes. So the dance changes floors. That is all. Yesterday the atoms danced in the shape of a brain, and the dance was thinking, and the dance was remembering what it had thought the day before, which is the whole trick of being a self, to be a pattern that keeps a copy of itself going from one moment to the next. Today the same atoms are dancing in the loose, easy shuffle of soil and water and air, a simpler dance, a dance with no memory, no worry, no name. Next season they will be pulled into the tight green choreography of a growing thing, and the season after into the quick bright dance of something that flies. The music never stopped. The dancers never left the floor. Only one particular figure, one especially intricate and self-aware figure that the atoms had been performing for a certain number of years, came to its final pose and dissolved back into the general motion. The way a wave that has traveled 1,000 miles across the Pacific finally reaches the sand and lays itself down flat and is, in the next breath, simply the sea again. The wave is gone. Not one drop of the water is missing. It was the sea the whole time, standing up for a moment in a shape we agreed to call a wave. And I keep coming back, as I hope you are drifting back, to that admission I made near the beginning, the one that sounds like a defeat and is really the doorway to the whole thing. In physics today, we have no knowledge of what energy is. We do not have a picture of a little blue fluid, a substance, a stuff that we could point to and say, there, that is the energy, hold it up to the light. We have only a number, a quantity we know how to compute in 9 different disguises, and a single unbreakable promise that when you add up all 9 disguises before and after any change at all, the 2 sums match. That is everything we know, and it is almost nothing. and it is enough to have built every engine and every star chart and every honest thing we understand about the fate of a cooling body in a quiet room. Let me sit with that admission a little longer, because there is a comfort hiding inside it that took me most of my life to feel properly. You might think it would be terrifying to learn that the one thing we are surest of in all of physics, the thing with no known exception anywhere in the whole universe, is a quantity we cannot picture, cannot hold, cannot even define except by the promise that it keeps. But it is not terrifying to me. There is a documentary someone made of me once, and in it I said a thing I meant with my whole heart. I said I do not have to know an answer. I do not feel frightened by not knowing things, by being lost in a mysterious universe without any purpose, which, as far as I can tell, is the way it really is. It does not frighten me, and I want you, drifting there in the dark, to try that thought on the way you would try on a coat that turns out to fit better than the one you came in wearing. Not knowing is not the same as being lost. You can be perfectly at home in a house with rooms you have never entered. So follow me back to the quiet room once more, and to the last of the 9 disguises, the one I have been saving, because it is the strangest and the most permanent. Mass energy. The famous little sentence, E equals mc squared, energy equals mass times the speed of light times the speed of light. Now people hear that and they think of bombs, and of stars, and of things violent and far away. But the truth of it is sitting right there in the cooling body, quiet as a stone. Every atom in you, every one of the 7 octillion, carries energy simply by existing, energy locked into the very fact of its mass, and the speed of light squared is an enormous number. So even a whisper of mass holds a roaring quantity of energy. That energy does not leave when you die. It does not disperse into the floor with the heat. It does not seep into the soil with the chemistry. It stays. It stays welded into the protons and the neutrons and the electrons, riding along unbothered as those atoms wander off into their next 100 million years of adventures. Of all the energy that was ever you, by far the greatest share is this, the mass energy, and it is the least disturbed of all. It was here before the heat left. It will be here long after the last bacterium has finished its meal. It is, in the plainest sense the universe allows, indestructible. I find something wonderful in the proportions of it. The energy you spend in a whole lifetime of walking and thinking and loving, the chemical energy, the 126 to 320 megajoules that fed you day by day, all of that living warmth is a small change compared to the mass energy sleeping in your atoms. It is like a great fortune sitting untouched in a vault, while you lived your whole life on the coins in your pocket. And when you die, the coins scatter, as coins do. The fortune stays. It simply changes owners, the way it always has, the way it did to make you in the first place, because every atom that built you was minted in some star that spent itself long before the earth was cool enough to hold a sea. Now I want to be honest with you about the second law, because I have been telling you a very clean story about the first law, the conservation of energy, the 28 blocks that always come out 28, and it is all true. But there is another law standing behind it with a sadder face, and if I did not introduce you to it, you would be right to feel I had cheated. The second law is about the difference between energy that is gathered and energy that is scattered, not how much, but how organized. A hot cup of coffee and a cold room hold a certain amount of energy between them. An hour later the coffee is cool and the room is a hair warmer, and the total energy is precisely the same. The blocks still count to 28, but something has been lost that the first law cannot see. The gathering is gone. The energy that was concentrated and useful and able to do work has spread itself thin, and it will not, of its own accord, gather itself back up. You will wait until the stars burn out and the coffee will not reheat itself from the room. There was a man named Schrödinger, a physicist who thought harder than almost anyone about what it means to be alive, and during a terrible war, he gave some lectures in Dublin and made a little book of them called simply What is Life? And his answer, boiled down, is that a living thing is a small, stubborn eddy that refuses for a while to spread out. You eat order and you excrete disorder. You reach into the environment and you suck the orderliness out of it, his very phrase, and you use that borrowed order to keep your own pattern sharp, against the endless smoothing pressure of the second law. Every breath, every meal, every heartbeat is a bailing bucket throwing entropy overboard as fast as it floods in. And death, in his cold and honest sentence, is simply the moment the bailing stops. The organism reaches thermodynamic equilibrium, he wrote, which is another way of saying it dies. The eddy smooths out. The whirlpool lets go of the water, and the water was only ever the river. So here is the shape of the whole thing, and I want you to hold both halves at once, gently, the way you would hold two smooth stones in one hand. The first law says nothing was lost. Not one joule. The heat that left the room is somewhere. The chemical energy in the broken bonds is feeding something small and hungry in the dark of the soil. The mass energy rides serene inside every scattered atom. Add it all up, before and after, and the sums match to the last decimal, because they always match, because that is the one promise the universe has never once broken. And the second law says, and yet something is over. The gathering is over. The particular, improbable, low-entropy arrangement that took the whole history of a life to assemble, the pattern that could remember yesterday's dance and choose to dance it again today, that specific precious concentration has spread out and will not spontaneously return. Both are true. Neither cancels the other. The energy is conserved and the pattern is gone, and there is no contradiction in that at all, once you understand that you were never the energy. You were the pattern the energy was making. And this is where I part company, quietly and without any quarrel, from the sad face of the second law. Because the second law tells you the truth about the eddy, but it does not get to tell you the truth about the river. The eddy is undone. But the water that was in it does not vanish, does not slow, does not mourn. It rejoins the current and rushes on, and it will make 10,000 more eddies, in 10,000 other shapes, none of which will be you, and all of which will be made of what was. The atoms that spelled out a thought in your brain this morning are not retired at your death. They are laid off from one job and hired instantly into another. Perpetual motion, that first great sentence I would save above all others, if I could save only one. All things are made of atoms, little particles that move around in perpetual motion. Perpetual. Not slowing. Not resting. Not asking permission. The very restlessness that made you possible is the restlessness that will disassemble you and carry you off. And it is the same restlessness, the identical dance, only the choreography changes. I stood at a seashore once and wrote something down, and I have never found a truer thing to say about all of this, so let me give it to you here in the dark. There are the rushing waves, mountains of molecules, each one stupidly minding its own business, trillions apart, yet forming white surf in unison. And out of that ancient churning, across ages and ages, something crawled up onto the dry land, and here it is, standing, atoms with consciousness, matter with curiosity. It stands at the sea and wonders at its own wondering. I, a universe of atoms, an atom in the universe. That is what you are. Not a thing the universe contains, but a way the universe briefly folds up on itself and looks around. And when the fold relaxes, the universe is not diminished. It has merely stopped holding that one shape and gone back to holding all the others. So do not be too quick to grieve the number that was you, because it was never lost, it cannot be lost, the law will not permit it. And do not cling too hard to the pattern that was you either, because the pattern was always on loan, borrowed order, bailed water, a candle flame that was never the wax and never the wick, but only the burning that passed between them. The wax remains, the burning moves. And somewhere, in some season not too far off, a green thing will lift a little of what was you up into the light, and turn it, atom by patient atom, back toward the sun. Let me sit with that image a little longer, because it repays the sitting. A green thing lifting a little of what was you into the light. It sounds almost like a comfort invented to soften a hard fact, but it is not an invention. It is the plainest bookkeeping there is. Follow one carbon atom. While you are alive, that carbon might sit in a rung of a protein in the muscle of your hand. It got there from a piece of bread, and the bread got it from a stalk of wheat, and the wheat pulled it out of the air as carbon dioxide, and the air had it because some animal or some fire or some rotting log breathed it out. That single atom has been around this loop more times than anyone could count. It did not begin with you, and it will not end with you. You are one address on a very long postal route. The letter keeps traveling, and when the muscle of the hand goes quiet and cool, the carbon does not go quiet. It waits, held loosely in a broken bond, until a bacterium or a beetle or a thread of fungus comes and takes it and breathes it back out into the air, and the wheat is waiting there in the field, and the whole loop closes and opens again. Nothing paused. Nothing was spent. The root simply added another stop. I want to be careful here, because it would be easy to let this slide into something soft and dishonest, and I have no use for that. When I say a little of what was you rises into a leaf, I am not telling you that your thoughts rise into the leaf, or that your memory of a summer afternoon rides along in the sap. It does not. The leaf gets the atoms. It does not get the arrangement. The pattern that held your afternoon, that particular dance in that particular knot of nerve cells, that is exactly the thing that stopped. I will not dress it up. Sean Carroll put it about as cleanly as it can be put. Physics keeps the ingredients, it does not preserve the recipe. The flour goes on to be 1,000 other loaves. The one loaf you were is not baked again. Both halves of that sentence are true, and the honest man holds them both at once and does not trade one away to feel better about the other. But look at what a strange and generous arrangement it actually is, once you stop demanding that it be either everything or nothing. The recipe was never the durable part. It was the borrowed part. Erwin Schrödinger saw this during the war, when he stood up in Dublin and gave those lectures that became the little book he called What is Life? He was after exactly this puzzle. How does a living thing, so orderly, so improbably arranged, hold itself together in a universe that is forever sliding toward disorder? And his answer was that it cheats in a way the law fully allows. A living thing does not resist the slide by standing still. It resists it by eating order and excreting disorder, by pulling in orderliness from its surroundings and pushing the mess back out. Schrödinger said the organism keeps itself alive by sucking orderliness from its environment. You are a whirlpool in a stream. The water is always leaving. The shape stays only because new water keeps arriving to take the shape. Stop the flow, and the whirlpool does not go somewhere else. It simply is not anymore. The water is all still there. The stream runs on exactly as full as before. What ends is a way the water was briefly moving. So death, in Schrödinger's clean accounting, is the moment the organism reaches thermodynamic equilibrium. That is his phrase, and it is a careful one. Equilibrium sounds peaceful, and in the deeper sense it is. It means the frantic, costly second-by-second work of holding yourself apart from your surroundings has been laid down. While you live, you are warmer than the room, and you must spend energy to stay that way. You are more ordered than the soil, and you must spend energy to stay that way. You are a pocket of stubborn difference, and the keeping of that difference is the whole labor of being alive. Equilibrium is when the differences relax. Warm meets cool, and they agree on one temperature. Ordered meets disordered, and they settle. It is not an event that happens to the atoms. It is the ceasing of a struggle the atoms were being made to fight. And here is the part that I find quietly beautiful. And I mean beautiful in the exact way, not the greeting card way. Every step of that relaxation obeys the first law to the last decimal. The warmth that leaves the body does not vanish because it is no longer being defended. It flows into the air and the floor and the bedclothes, and it warms them by an amount you could in principle measure, an amount that answers exactly to the warmth that left. The chemical energy locked in the fats and the sugars and the proteins, that whole store of 126 to 320 megajoules, does not evaporate because the owner has stopped needing it. It sits in the bonds, patient, until something with an appetite comes to break those bonds and take the energy for its own living. The fat alone holds about 37 kilojoules in every gram, and that is real fuel, and nature does not waste real fuel. A whole slow economy of small creatures is waiting to be paid. Every joule that was in you gets spent. It just gets spent by somebody else, on somebody else's living. Think of it as an estate that cannot be hoarded and cannot be burned, only bequeathed. The law forbids the account from ever reading empty, and the law forbids the account from staying yours. Those two rules together force a particular outcome, and it is the gentlest outcome imaginable. The whole of what you held must be given away, in full, to the world immediately around you. The heat to the room, the chemical energy to the bacteria and the fungi and the beetles, the atoms through them to the soil, and from the soil to the roots, and from the roots to the leaf, and from the leaf, should some grazing thing come by, to another warm and moving body somewhere down the line. It is the most complete inheritance there is. Nothing held back, nothing lost in the handing over. The estate distributed to the last farthing, because the counting rule that Feynman built his whole chapter around will not tolerate a single missing coin. And I keep coming back to that counting rule, because it is the spine of the whole thing, and I do not want you to mistake it for a mere formula. Remember the child with the blocks. 28 blocks, absolutely indestructible, and no matter what mischief the day contains, no matter how many blocks end up under the rug, or dropped in the bathwater, or hidden in a friend's toy box across the street. When the mother sits down at night and does the arithmetic properly, allowing for the water level rising and the lump under the carpet, the sum comes out to 28, every time. And Feynman's sly point, the one that takes a moment to land, is that there are no blocks. You never see them. You cannot hold one. There is no little wooden cube of energy anywhere in the world. There is only the number, and the unbreakable promise that the number does not change. Energy is not a substance. It is a quantity that the universe refuses to let vary, and Feynman said flatly that in physics today we have no knowledge of what it is. We know only what it does. It stays constant. It is the most reliable stranger in all of nature, a thing we cannot see, cannot name at bottom, cannot picture, and yet cannot ever catch cheating. Now carry that promise to the deathbed and ask the only question that matters for our accounting. If the number is always 28, then when the body cooled, where did its 28 go? Not away. Away is not a place the number is allowed to reach. It went out into the room, and into the soil, and into the small hungry lives, and into the eventual leaf, in shares that add up, when you do the arithmetic properly, to exactly what was there before. The dying did not subtract anything from the universe. Subtraction is precisely the one operation forbidden. All the dying did was move the terms of the sum around, from one side of the ledger to 100 others, without ever changing the total. And I find I cannot be frightened of an arithmetic that careful. A universe that will not lose track of a single joule of firewood is not a careless universe. Whatever else it is, whatever we do not know about it, and we do not know much, it is not in the habit of throwing things away. And yet I have to be honest with you now. Honest the way I try to be honest with my own students when they corner me after a lecture and ask the question I cannot dodge. I have been talking to you for some time about a quantity that gets moved around but never lost. I have counted it into the room and the soil and the leaf. I have sworn to you that the total holds. But if you stop me and ask, quietly, so what is it, this thing you keep counting, this energy, this stuff that never goes missing, I have to tell you something that took me a long while to be brave enough to say out loud in front of a hall full of trusting young people. We do not know what energy is. I mean that plainly. In physics today, we have no knowledge of what energy actually is. We have a rule for counting it. We have 9 different formulas for 9 different disguises, and every one of them gives a number, and the numbers always sum to the same total. But there is no little cube of it, no fluid, no substance you could pour into a jar and hold up to the light. It is not a thing. It is a fact about things. It is the fact that no matter how the world rearranges itself, one particular sum stays fixed. Think how strange that is when you set it beside the deathbed. The most reliable law we own, the one law I told you has no known exception anywhere in all of nature, the law we lean on to promise the grieving that nothing was truly lost, is a law about a quantity we cannot even define. We can only describe how it behaves. It is like knowing a man only by the fact that he always pays his debts to the penny, while never once seeing his face. You could trust such a man completely with your accounts and still not be able to say who he is. That is our relationship with energy. Complete trust, total ignorance. And somehow the trust is not diminished by the ignorance. That, if anything, is the lesson the dying body teaches most clearly. You do not need to understand a thing in order to be certain it is conserved. So let me put the two facts in the same room and let them look at each other. The first fact is that we cannot say what energy is. The second fact is that whatever it is never created and never destroyed. Not in the burning of a log, not in the beating of a heart, not in the last slow beat of the last one. Now, most people, when they first hear that we do not know what energy is, feel a small drop in the stomach, as if the floor has gone soft. They wanted the floor to be solid all the way down. They wanted, underneath all the counting, some final little brick you could knock on. And there is no brick. Remember the boy and his blocks, the 28 little indestructible blocks that stayed 28 no matter where the child hid them, under the rug, at the bottom of the bathwater, out the window. I told you the punchline was that there are no blocks. There was never any block to find. There was only the counting rule, and the rule was the whole of the reality. The number was real. The thing being numbered was a fiction we invented to make the numbering feel comfortable. And you are, in exactly this sense, a number and not a block. That is the hardest turn in this whole long talk, and I want to take it slowly, because it is the turn everything else has been walking toward. When you ask what happens to your energy after you die, you are still, somewhere in the back of your mind, imagining a little quantity of you. A personal reservoir, a private stock of jewels with your name written on it, and you want to follow that reservoir out the door and see where it is stored. But there is no reservoir with your name on it, any more than there was a block with the boy's name on it. There is a pattern that for a while kept a certain quantity organized in a certain shape. The quantity was never yours. It was on loan, every jewel of it, borrowed from the sun through the wheat and the cattle and the bread, held for a season in the warm arrangement you call your body, and always, always on its way somewhere else, even while you held it. You were not a tank. You were a water wheel. And no one weeps for the river because the wheel stops turning. The river was never in the wheel. It was only passing through, and it is passing through still. I want to sharpen this because I think it is genuinely comforting and not merely clever, and I would not offer you cleverness at this hour. Consider what it means that even in the fullest bloom of life, you were never a fixed collection of matter. The atoms that spell you out today are not the atoms that spelled you out a few years ago. They came into your brain, did the work, held the memory, and then they left, and new ones took their exact places and took up the exact same work, the same dance, remembering yesterday's steps, though not one of yesterday's dances remained on the floor. I said once, and I meant it, that the thing I call my individuality is only a pattern, only a dance. If that is true while you live, and it is, then the great fear about dying quietly loses its footing. You have already survived the complete replacement of your material substance many times over. The atoms you were made of at the age of 10 are scattered across the countryside now, in the air, in the water, in other creatures entirely, and you did not die when they left. You did not even notice, because you were never them. You were the choreography, and the choreography persisted by handing itself from one set of particles to the next, the way a wave hands itself from one patch of water to the next and rolls all the way to shore without a single drop making the whole journey. So then what actually ends? Be careful here, because the temptation is to say nothing ends, and that is a lie, and I will not tell it to you to make you feel better. Something ends. The dance ends. The particular arrangement, the specific and staggeringly improbable ordering that let a bag of ordinary atoms sit up and wonder about itself, that stops. The recipe is not preserved. Only the ingredients are preserved. Physics keeps the ingredients and lets the recipe go, and the recipe was the part that was you in the way you most care about being you. I will not pretend the recipe is written in some fireproof book somewhere and read back later. So far as we can tell, when the pattern stops resisting, when the metabolism that was holding disorder at bay finally lets go, the arrangement relaxes toward the flat, warm, featureless sameness that all arrangements drift toward when nothing is fighting the drift. The organism reaches equilibrium. And reaching equilibrium is simply another way of saying it has died. Schrödinger put it in just those words, working it out in wartime lectures far from home, and I have never found a way to say it more exactly. Life is the act of borrowing order faster than you lose it. Death is the moment you stop borrowing. The debt does not vanish. It was always coming due. It only comes due all at once. But notice, and this is the thing I keep returning to because it keeps returning to me, that the collapse of the recipe is itself a lawful event. It is not chaos breaking the rules. It is the rules patiently applied, doing exactly what they always do. Every joule that leaves the cooling body leaves by a route you could in principle trace with a thermometer and a careful nose and enough patience. The warmth radiates outward as infrared light, that quiet, invisible glow every warm thing pours into the cold around it, and it warms the sheet and the air and the floorboards by amounts that sum precisely to what the body lost. The chemical energy locked in the bonds, that 126 to 320 megajoules held in the fat and the muscle and the marrow, does not evaporate. It is eaten. It is pried out of the broken bonds by the small hungry lives I keep mentioning, the bacteria that carry no grief and keep flawless books, and it fuels their spinning and dividing exactly as the fat once fueled a footstep. 37 kilojoules in every gram of that fat, and not one of them exempt from the counting. The atoms themselves, all 7 octillion of them, go on moving, because moving is the one thing atoms cannot stop doing. They cycle out of the still body into the soil, and out of the soil into a root, and up the root into a leaf, and the leaf spreads itself flat under the same sun that lent the energy in the first place, and begins without ceremony the same old dance to a new and slightly different tune. So the pattern that was you is gone, and the motion that carried the pattern is not gone, and the difference between those two sentences is the whole of what physics can honestly tell you about the matter. It is less than the priests promise and more than the frightened suppose. It says you were a verb, not a noun. It says the loan is called in, but the currency is immortal. And it says, in the strict language of a law with no known exception, that the universe which built you took nothing back that it did not immediately put to use somewhere else, in the same breath, without a pause, without a loss, before the room had even finished going cold. Let me sit with that word for a moment. Verb. It is a strange thing to call a person, and I want to be honest with you about how far I can push it before it breaks. Because I told you that we can trace the heat, and we can trace the chemistry, and we can trace the atoms into the soil and up into the leaf, and every bit of that is bookkeeping I would defend in front of any audience anywhere. But underneath all of it there is a splinter I have not pulled out yet, and if I left it in you would wake in the small hours and feel it. So let me pull it out now, gently. I told you, back near the beginning, that in physics today we have no knowledge of what energy is. I said it plainly, and I meant it plainly. And I want you to notice that we have now spent this whole long evening following a thing whose nature we cannot state. We can say where it goes, we can add it up before and add it up after, and find the sums agree to as many decimal places as our instruments can hold. We can name its 9 faces and write a little formula under each one. But if you stop me in the corridor and ask me to hand you a spoonful of energy, to show you the stuff itself, the way I could show you a spoonful of sugar, I would have nothing to put in your hand. There is no substance there. There is only a number that refuses to change. Remember the child with the blocks, and remember the punchline that there were no blocks at all, only the stubborn arithmetic that the count came out the same at the end of every day. Energy is like that. It is not a fluid, not a fog, not a fine invisible sand poured into you at birth and poured out again when you die. It is a quantity. It is a bookkeeping entry that nature, for reasons we do not understand, is not permitted to falsify. And here is why I make a fuss about this at the hour when you are trying to fall asleep. People hear that energy is conserved, and something in them relaxes, because they picture energy as a kind of glowing essence, and they think, my essence is preserved, some warm private cloud of me drifts off intact and joins the great warm cloud of everything. That is a lovely picture, and it is not what the law says. The law does not say your essence is preserved. The law says a number is preserved. The number was never yours. It was never anybody's. It is a property of the whole system, of you and the room and the air and the floor and the far wall all taken together, and when you die the number belonging to that whole system is exactly what it was. Not one part in a trillion different, and the fact that a portion of it used to be tallied against your name is a matter of accounting convenience, not a matter of possession. You did not own your jewels any more than a wave owns the water it runs across. The water was there before the wave and stays after. The wave was a shape moving through it. You were a shape moving through it. Now I can feel the objection forming, because it formed in me too, the first time I thought it all the way through. You want to say, all right, the energy was never mine, fine, but the atoms, surely the atoms were mine. I could weigh them. I could point to a carbon atom in the muscle of my arm and say, that one is mine. I ate it. I built it into myself. It answers to me. And for the purposes of ordinary life, that is a perfectly good thing to say. But I did some work once with two other fellows on the behavior of light and electrons at the very smallest scales, and they were kind enough to give the three of us a prize for it. And the deepest lesson buried in all that machinery is a lesson about ownership, and it is this. At the level of the particles themselves, there is no such thing as this particular one. Every electron in the universe is identical to every other electron, not similar, not nearly the same, but identical in a way that has real, measurable physical consequences. You cannot paint a dot on one to tell it from its neighbor. You cannot follow it through a crowd. If two of them trade places while your back is turned, there is no experiment, none, not even in principle, that could ever detect that the swap occurred. The universe does not keep a record of which electron is which, because as far as anything we can measure is concerned, the question has no meaning. So think about what that does to the sentence. That carbon atom is mine. The carbon atom is a little bundle of protons and neutrons and electrons, and not one of those pieces carries a label, and not one of them remembers where it has been, and any of them could be exchanged this instant for its identical twin from a star or a stone or the breath of a stranger, and nothing whatsoever would change. The atoms in your arm are not marked. They never were. What made them yours was not any quality inside them. It was the arrangement. It was that they had for a while been caught up into a pattern, drawn into the dance, made to move in the particular remembered way that was you. And a pattern is not a thing you can own the way you own the bricks of a house. It is more like a tune. If I hum a melody and then you hum the same melody, we have not shared any physical object between us. There is no lump of melody that passed from my throat to yours. There is only the shape, the order, the relation of one note to the next, and that shape can live in 1,000 throats at once and belong to none of them. This is the splinter, and now it is out where you can see it. When you die, you do not lose your energy, because it was never a position, only a sum. You do not lose your atoms, because they were never marked, only borrowed, and borrowed things of a kind that cannot even in principle be told from their replacements. What actually ends is the arrangement, the recipe, the tune, the particular remembered way the borrowed, unmarked, unownable particles were persuaded to move for the little while they were caught in you. And that ending is real. I do not want to soften it into something it is not. The pattern that could recognize a face, and dread a Monday, and love a piece of music, and lie awake wondering what happens after, that pattern comes apart, and it does not reassemble, and no law of physics I know of promises that it will. The gentleman who put it so cleanly said that physics keeps the ingredients but does not preserve the recipe, and I have not found a way to improve on that in all the years I have turned it over. The flour is kept. The sugar is kept. Every gram is accounted for and sent along to the next kitchen. The cake is not kept. The cake was the arranging. But watch what happens if you hold both halves of that in your two hands at once, because most people can only carry one at a time, and that is why they end up either terrified or telling comfortable stories. Hold the ending in your left hand, the recipe is gone, truly gone, and that is worth being quiet about. Now hold the other thing in your right hand, the ingredients are not diminished, not one atom, not one joule, not by the smallest measurable amount, and they do not sit idle grieving, they are drawn immediately, in the same breath as I said before, into the next arranging. The carbon that spelt a thought yesterday is spelling a root tomorrow and a beetle the week after, and perhaps, in some slow patient century, a thought again in someone not yet born, who will no more know it was once you than you knew it was once a fern, or a fish, or the inside of a star that died so that carbon could exist at all. The dance floor is never empty. The music never fully stops. Only the dancers change, and the dancers, it turns out, were never the point. I find, and I say this as a man who has watched the accounting all his life and trusts it more than he trusts almost anything, that this is neither as cold as the frightened fear, nor as sweet as the hopeful pretend. It is a third thing. It is the plain truth, and the plain truth has a dignity that neither dread nor false comfort can touch. You are a way that matter found for a while to fall back on itself and look around and be astonished. That folding will come undone. The matter that did the folding is indestructible in every way that our best laws can measure, and it goes on, and it will fold again into 10,000 other astonishments, most of which will never know your name, and none of which are diminished by that. There is a certain quantity that does not change in all the manifold changes nature undergoes. You were, briefly, a very particular shape that quantity was pushed into. And when I say the loan is called in, I want you to hear, underneath it, the quieter and truer sentence, that the lender lost nothing, spent nothing, wasted nothing, and had already, before the room went cold, begun to lend the very same wealth to the very next thing that asked.